Keeping this story through to us throughout the past few hours, been riveted to it myself. What a momentous day in world peace. You're with me, Martin Daubney, now through until 6 p.m. Just to bring it to speed of where we are at present, Donald J. Trump, of course, the President of the United States, is mid-air in Air Force One on his way to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Had due to leave several hours earlier, around about 3 hours behind schedule. Donald Trump was meant to be leaving Israel right now. He's yet to land. When he does land, he's going to join other world leaders from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and of course our very own Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer to sign the Gaza peace plan. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu decided to snub that meeting. Is that seen as a snub towards some of those world leaders? He was due to meet one of the delegates from Palestine, didn't fancy that. Or was it a wider snub of people at this meeting, perhaps even including Sir Keir Starmer, who've perhaps chosen the other team in this? In an historic address to the Israeli parliament earlier on, Benjamin Netanyahu called Donald Trump our greatest friend that Israel has ever had. Donald Trump concurred. This is an historic dawn of a new Middle East. And today the skies are calm, the guns are silent, and the sirens are still. Live pictures on your screen there of the square in Tel Aviv. And we are, of course, the latest news. There was an expectation that as well as the 20 survivors, the hostages from 737 days, an incredible tally, they were held hostage by Hamas. The bodies of 28 hostages were also due to be released, but we've since learned only 4 of them are being released today, causing huge consternation and anger from Israel. You can only imagine the heartbreak of the families there of those who lost their loved ones in the tunnels, the networks underneath Gaza City, all that time, living in terror, living in fear, only dreaming of their release. We saw some incredible footage a short while ago there of one of those surviving hostages waving to crowds, emaciated, withered away, ghost-like in his appearance, but his eyes hardly able to comprehend freedom, looking out at a crowd, waving him back to a Tel Aviv he perhaps thought he would never see again. The next stage now is the rebuilding of the Middle East. Donald Trump talked effusively of the great wealth of the Arab, of the Muslim nations in the area, repeatedly name-checking Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Jordan, and the rest, talking of their enormous material wealth now to instead spend money on war, on offense and defense, to spend the money on rebuilding the nation, of coming together. He also had a huge political and military flex of muscles, talking about how they got rid of ISIS in 3 weeks, when previous regimes have said it would take 4 years. Donald Trump said, we are not going to abide by political correctness anymore. We just want to get the job done. And by Jove, they've got this job done. They've got this job done in record time and to such efficiency, even the BBC today are having to admit that Donald Trump has done a good job. Say what you like about Donald Trump, and a lot of people don't especially like the man. He's got this done in short shrift, bringing peace to an area which has been literally ravaged by war for my entire lifetime and many, many years before. More live pictures there of Palestinian prisoners being released in Gaza. Part of the deal, of course, was an exchange of prisoners. We're expecting this to carry on. Many, many more prisoners, of course, being released by the Israeli authorities in return for those 20 survivors and the 28 bodies of hostages we now believe, we now confirmed, to have been deceased. This will continue throughout the coming days now as we build towards a broader peace, a signing of that political peace. And isn't it interesting how at the weekend Bridget Phillipson, our education secretary, was on the airwaves talking about we have played a key role behind the scenes in shaping this, only for Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador to Israel, to post a clip on social media saying, I assure you, she's delusional. She can thank Donald Trump any time just to set the record straight. And I wonder what the political landscape would look like in the rebuilding of the area. And I wonder if that landscape may exclude the United Kingdom. Was there an opportunity to be a part of this fresh dawn in the Middle East? And has that opportunity perhaps been squandered by a Labour government many believe had more sympathy towards Palestine and state recognition and imposing sanctions on the sales of arms to Israel in its darkest hour, in its hour of need? Might that come to haunt Sir Keir Starmer on an international stage? You know, we feel so comfortable on, while a political storm rages back here in Britain about China. An opportune moment now to bring in Chris Hope, our political editor. Chris Hope, I know you've been talking non-stop for hours, but may I say you've done a fantastic job. I think the entire channel has done a fantastic job today. A truly historic day. Let's look ahead now, Chris, to Donald Trump landing in Egypt at Sharm el-Sheikh, signing of the deal. But is this the lip service part of the day? The previous part of the day today, the two true allies are Israel and United States, the true power brokers, the axis of power. But now, looking to allies in the area to rebuild, to regroup, and to re-establish, finally, peace in the Middle East.
Hi, Martin. Great to see you again in the studio after a few weeks covering party conferences. Yeah, no question. I think this matters as much as what we saw, the moving scenes in the Knesset. That is looking backwards at where Israel has been. It's now got its live hostages back. 4 of the bodies of the remaining few are back. I think there's another 16 or so to come, bodies of hostages. But looking forward, it's about this moment in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, you won't see Bibi Netanyahu there. We all hope for that photograph of the leader of the Palestinian Authority shaking hands with President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, almost to show this moment of coming together of these two foes. But that won't happen because of there's a religious festival that the Jewish faith is observing tonight. Because of well, we don't know. Let's take them on face value. The kind of day when let's take them at face value, Martin. There is apparent good faith to make this work, and let's hope it does work. We know that Sir Keir Starmer's there, Emmanuel Macron from France, and others too. 3 hours later, they're all sitting around having multiple combinations of bilateral meetings while they wait for Donald Trump to arrive. The UK's role is interesting. We have heard, haven't we, from over the weekend from Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, of course running to be Deputy Leader, saying how the UK has played a role in this peace agreement. That was disputed in flowery terms by Mike Huckabee. He's the US Ambassador to Israel. Remind you what Phillipson said, we have played a key role behind the scenes in shaping this. That's not what Mike Huckabee says. He says in terms, I assure you, she's delusional. She can thank Donald Trump any time just to set that record straight. That prompted another remark overnight from Steve Witkoff, who is Donald Trump's peacemaker-in-chief, leading the way on Ukraine for the States, but also in the Middle East. And he said he wanted in particular to recognise the incredible input and tireless efforts of National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell. Now, Jonathan Powell is under fire, of course, for UK's relationship with China, and that could emerge again. There's a big statement happening in the Commons about 4:30 or 5:30 our time when his role will become under scrutiny. But just finally, Martin, Boris Johnson have just chucked his own ha'porth into this debate, speaking to the Daily Tea podcast in the last few moments. He's been saying that the UK had no role. He likened Donald Trump's role over the Gaza ceasefire as a fart in a gale. He says, Starmer, the great human bollard, is totally ludicrous. What has the UK contributed to this? As far as I can see, sadly, not a lot. So the rather definitely a side issue compared to what's happening in the Middle East today, but a side issue is UK's role. Some would say not much. The UK says quite a lot.
Typically floral and flatulent language there from Boris Johnson pertaining to Sir Keir Starmer, but perhaps he's got a point. On a serious point, you and I have been talking for many weeks, if not months, about the position that the Labour Party has taken on this conflict, and undeniably, particularly if you ask the Jewish community in this country, they feel that the Labour Party sided with the Palestinian regime, not with Hamas, but with Palestine as a nation, for its own state recognition, for its own plight, as historically been oppressed, been colonialised, the kind of things that normally get the left excited, has been, really what's taken their imagination during this. And if you're an Israeli now and you're looking at Sir Keir Starmer shuffling up to signing a peace deal, have you got a right to say, well, who are you, mate?
There's a bit of that, but also the deal they're signing isn't really about Israel in a sense. It's about Gaza and rebuilding Gaza. It's essentially, it's lots of cheques being written for Gaza today. We've committed £20 million of our money as taxpayers for Gaza, more to come. And we heard from Donald Trump in the Knesset there saying how there'll be lots of billions more coming from Arab nations. And I think that's why I don't think it's too serious to see Netanyahu not being there. It's about the future of Gaza and the international support for Gaza, and this way Israel may take a slight back seat.
Well, the fact of the matter remains, live pictures there from Gaza, quite astonishing, a beautiful boulevard there. We're led to believe perhaps the whole area had been flattened. But on a serious point, this is Gaza now. As we can still see those coaches putting into view, of course, they're packed with political prisoners, part of the horse trading, of course, midair there. There is Donald Trump approaching. Those live pictures there from Sharm el-Sheikh, meaning that Air Force One is now within camera view. Took off around about 45 minutes ago. Must have really put his foot down, Chris, to get across there. It's normally about an hour and 20 if you're a regular member of the public, but I guess the Air Force One is on full throttle.
There was a clear airspace for him, Martin, let me tell you. I mean, I think the language you heard from Donald Trump was moving. It was. In the Knesset, those who didn't see it or hear it on GBNews. The skies are calm, he said, the guns are silent, sirens are still. This is not only the end of the war, Donald Trump says, this is the end of an age of terror and death and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God. I mean, of course, Americans do talk about faith in a way that we don't in the UK, but you couldn't really besmirch that kind of language from Donald Trump. There were two communists who shouted out from a seated position, they were ushered out. That didn't really chime, I think, with the gravity of the moment. And the names were name-checked, weren't they, by Donald Trump? Ivanka, his daughter, Jared Kushner, of course, his son-in-law, and also Mario Rubio and Steve Witkoff, as I said earlier. No mention of Tony Blair yet. His role's interesting. He's out there waiting for that plane to land in Sharm el-Sheikh. He may well have a role on this new board of peace in Gaza. Of course, he had a role, didn't he, back in the late noughties when he was as part of that group, trying to keep peace or a degree of peace in Gaza, and that didn't work out. So didn't last long. But he has had a role in peacemaking. Of course, he also has some history in the Middle East with the Iraq War in 2003. So whether Hamas want to accept him, wait and see.
Live pictures on your screen now, as you can see, of Air Force One just circling around to land at Sharm el-Sheikh there in Egypt. What a magnificent sight that aircraft is. It truly is an airborne colossus coming into land ahead of this historic signing of that Gaza peace plan to help cement the rebuilding of the region.
I should say, I'm not sure where the music's coming from. I doubt it's being fired out by speakers at the airport there. It may just be put on by the feed.
I think I'm playing that. I'm feeling pretty excited about this. On a serious point, I think the speech earlier on that both Netanyahu and Donald Trump gave were incredibly poignant, incredibly moving, incredibly reflective. And I also think it's displayed something, Chris, so the most political might, the military might, and also the will of hope is being displayed. The coming together of America and Israel today, particularly, I think will never be forgotten throughout all of history. Benjamin Netanyahu, has his critics globally. He has his critics domestically, but his place in the history of Israel has been firmly cemented as of today. And Donald Trump as an everlasting ally, and America as an everlasting ally, was truly cemented in a way I thought was almost spiritual today when they talked about God, name-checking figures from the Bible. I thought it was an astonishing display of brotherly coming together.
And he was called a colossus, wasn't he, Donald Trump? And it did feel, for me, watching, I've met him, luckily enough to meet him 3 times in the past year, and he does really control the room with his how he is, with his character, his personality. But I think that will be a highlight of his, certainly his second term as President Bailey started, probably his first term, maybe of his life, to be saluted in that way in the Knesset. There was a quote that I thought really struck me. He said, "My personality is all about stopping wars." And we've been saying on your show for a while now, Martin, he's 79 years old, he's a grandfather. He does want to stop the fighting. I mean, and to do that, he uses literally the weapons he's got, but also the levers he's got to make that happen. He uses strength to project peace, I think. That is not understood or recognised by his critics, who simply can't stand him at all. But I think people may be rethinking that, and of course the Nobel Peace Prize is a year away before it's announced again. But this is a moment here, isn't it?
Benjamin Netanyahu even nodded to that in his speech earlier and said, this year the prize isn't yours, Donald Trump, but next year surely it will be. And talking, Chris Hope, about the Gaza peace plan and who might be on that board of peace, the peace board, Tony Blair, one of the few rare moments of humour perhaps in this entire state of history, was when it came out last week that even Hamas might reject Tony Blair. Even Hamas might not want to work with Tony Blair. What a time to be alive. Now let's bring in our guest, our anchor, our rock today, Mark White, our home and security editor. Mark, I hope your vocal cords have taken a well-earned rest. You've been going solidly 4 hours now. Mark, as we see live pictures on our screen now of Air Force One seemingly descending towards landing in Egypt, tell us about this next chapter. What can we expect from the signing of this Gaza peace plan?
Well, I think what we'll see, Martin, in terms of the delegation of world leaders on the ground is this determination to take the Trump peace plan as it's been branded and run with it. The goodwill that there is now from so many countries in that region, even Iran, you know, has been, I think, very, very quiet on this in recent days. Normally you would get bellicose language coming out of Tehran. There's very little of that, and in fact, Donald Trump in the Knesset, in his speech, as we see Air Force One there, just about to touch down at Sharm el-Sheikh, was very, very inclusive, I think, in his language, saying to the regime in Tehran that the hand of friendship is open to them too, if they want to start playing a more constructive role in the region, in particular, of course, in Gaza, having played such a destructive role in Gaza and the region before, Hamas being an Iranian proxy, Hamas being armed and funded by Iran to go and cause such absolute heartache and carnage in Israel on October the 7th and many days since. So the hope now has to be that the momentum going forward with all of these neighbours in that region determined to play their part and just ensure that whoever replaces Hamas is an administration with a more constructive idea in their head about what they can do for the future of this enclave, because there's every reason to believe that with all of the money that these rich Arab states have and many other rich industrialized nations have, that they're willing to invest in Gaza can be used in a very constructive way to really build a community in Gaza that is something to be proud of. A country, or an enclave, I should say, that doesn't channel that money into building hundreds of miles of tunnels and boosting their weapons supplies to just continue the cycle of war with their neighbour in Israel. We may be looking, at least the hope is, that we are looking at a more constructive way forward. I should say as well, Martin, some breaking news within the last few minutes. We've been celebrating, of course, throughout the day, the release of those hostages who are still alive, now back safely within the bosom of the Israeli family, that the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, is on its way as we speak to that meeting point in the southern Gaza Strip to take possession of a number of coffins that carry the remains of Hamas captives, of Israeli hostages who didn't make it to today, who have not tasted freedom again, but at least their remains are being repatriated back to their loved ones in Israel, that they can finally be laid to rest after more than 2 years in captivity.
Mark White, we can see now the presidential cars from Egypt going towards that airport there at Sharm el Sheikh. The president, of course, will step inside the beast and head towards this signing. Mark White, something else I was struck by earlier on today. There were so many details to pick out of Donald Trump's speech, but he talked about how quickly they eliminated ISIS. Less they had time to spare from 4 weeks. Previous regimes have said the job would take years. And he said, we didn't want to fight a war in a PC way. And he just dropped in casually how effective the B-2 bombers were. He said, oh yeah, we just decided to order 28 more of them, a whole pile of them. He said, Mark White, they cost about $4 billion each. President Trump there talking about over $110 billion worth of extra military hardware. And in every sentence he talked about was extra power, extra displays of we're in charge now. And I thought it was very moving and very telling how he said we're building a new allegiance now of Arabian and Muslim states with huge sums of money. The sums of money that it would take to rebuild Gaza, he kept saying, would be huge. But to these nations, it's not a great deal of money. A new alliance, a new brotherhood, a new scope of power across the area. And yet, Mark White, no mention of people like Sir Keir Starmer.
No mention of Sir Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron or so many of the other leaders that decided to recognise the state of Palestine, something that there's no doubt the US administration saw as very unhelpful. Donald Trump said as much when he was here in the UK and he was asked what his thoughts were about the US government, the UK government embarking on that path, and there's no doubt the US administration felt that this was exactly the wrong thing to do. Well, despite that, in spite of that, Donald Trump and his administration, his officials who've been in that region, have managed to pull this off, have managed to get this peace deal underway. And you mentioned there about the strength of the US state now. I think you're absolutely right there, Martin. I think there's a newfound respect around the world for America, a respect that in recent years had fallen away. There is no doubt, but he is a man with a force of personality that, of course, is getting sides around the table, but he's backing that up with military strength. He doesn't want, it's clear, to embark on forever wars that previous presidents have done, but nor will he shy away from the need to do that if he has to, and that was borne out by that very intensive strike on Iran at a time where Iran was reaching for nuclear capabilities, nuclear bombs, and not willing to engage properly and constructively in a process that would take them away from achieving the bomb. He backed up Israel. They bombed Iran, and now look where we are. We have Iran, at least at this stage, that certainly seems chastened, that seems willing to just take a step back from the very disruptive path that it had embarked on through its proxies in, of course, Gaza, but in southern Lebanon, still in Yemen, in Israel, in Syria and Iraq as well. It's diminished, greatly diminished in that region. And while it's diminished, a lot of that due to the actions, not just of Donald Trump, but absolutely the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu after these past 2 years in going after these proxies, in getting rid of that circle of fire around Israel, degrading it to such an extent that it is no longer the threat that it was. That's paved the way for this process. That coupled, Martin, with the way in which this US administration has been building these alliances with the Gulf states in particular so that they could be on board and as fully invested, it seems, in this peace process as the US has been. We've not had that really to any of the same extent with previous administrations. They all seem to be on board with that, and while they are, that gives us, I think, optimism that maybe now we could be in the position where a proper, long-lasting peace process could be on the cards.
And well, why we can just see now the presidential limousines of Egypt going out to greet Air Force One. Air Force One now taxied to a halt. The stairs will come down soon. Donald Trump will emerge, driving out to meet him there, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And we will then go back to the historic signing of the Gaza peace plan, now being called the Trump peace plan. The next stage of cementing a lasting peace and a rebuilding of the Middle East about to start, and our very own eagle has landed. I'm joined by Sir Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, just joined me in the studio. You had initially come in, Mel Stride, to talk about Rachel Reeves' tax hike on the wealthy. Seems a piffling matter in comparison. Perhaps we'll get around some domestic politics in a bit. But I wanted to ask you, Sir Mel, something a lot of people have been talking about here is a sense, has Sir Keir Starmer painted himself, and by default the United Kingdom, if you like, outside the circle of trust with Israel?
Well, I think he's ended up putting us in a very difficult situation, not least, of course, because of his decision to recognise Palestine. And as a consequence of that, I think being seen to do that for all the wrong reasons. It didn't introduce any leverage into the negotiations. In fact, it had the opposite result. Marco Rubio said it made things more difficult to get to the point that we've got to today. And the reason why he did it, of course, was pressure from his own backbenchers. And I think when it comes to these kind of issues, we need a little less student politics and a bit more grown-up diplomacy, which I'm afraid is not what we've seen from Keir Starmer. Because
there could have been huge opportunity. I mean, multi-billion-pound contracts to rebuild the area, to be a part of cementing the peace process, absolutely being seen as an ally of Israel and an ally of the United States. And Benjamin Netanyahu isn't going to the signing of this peace deal today, Mel Stride. He said it clashes with the Jewish holiday. It might be because he doesn't want to bump into the Palestinian delegate. It might be because he doesn't want to shake hands with people like Sir Keir Starmer. You can only think, Mel Stride, that Britain, despite some might say ludicrous claims by Bridget Phillipson at the weekend that we were part and parcel of cementing this behind the scenes, we weren't.
No. I mean, look, you've got to be realistic about who the big player in all this is. That is the Americans, understandably. But we could have been so much better. And for the kind of reasons that I gave, we should have been in there doing all that diplomatic hard graft alongside our allies. As you say, hopefully this phase one will be concluded in the right way, and we move on to phase two, which is governance and finally rebuilding Gaza as an area of peace and stability. And all those opportunities that we as a country could benefit from, I think to some degree have been imperiled here. given the way the government has gone at these issues.
You see live pictures there on our screen. The cabin door of Air Force One now open. We'll soon greet Donald Trump onto Egyptian soil. Chris Hope.
Well, Mel Stroud, we are told by the government they are working closely with the US, Egypt, Qatar, Turkey. Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, now in Sharm el-Sheikh with Keir Starmer, speaks to Steve Witkoff almost daily, we're told, having meetings with Netanyahu, was meeting Trump when he was there. Also, Mr Powell meeting in Egypt last week. They are trying to tell us that behind the scenes they've been very busy. Do you believe them?
Well, we're getting mixed messages, aren't we? Because Bridget Phillipson was out on the media claiming fulsome credit for the government in terms of what's happened here. And Mike Huckabee, who is the US ambassador to Israel, saying that she's deluded in saying that. So I think the very best they've got here are mixed messages. And as I say, I think there was that critical decision that Keir Starmer took under pressure from his backbenchers to recognise Palestine in that way, and at that time was deeply unhelpful. And Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, saying that actually was very unhelpful.
But France, Australia, Canada, they all did it at the same time. We moved together, didn't we, as one?
They're matters for them. But look, if you ask the question, for example, why is it that he chose to do that, I think it's very clear. It was pressure from his backbenchers, and it wasn't good diplomacy or statecraft on his part.
Well, I would add, Chris Hope, the very people you just mentioned, Australia, Ireland, Canada, France, all of those that have been queuing up to fawn over the recognition of Palestine, I think they'll be outside the tent now. They are totally outside the tent. Yeah. They can bang on all they like about working behind the scenes. Who cares about behind the scenes? You should be on the front row, a front row seat with history, and we're not.
With Israel, and why that matters, I remember vividly when Israel bombed Doha on 9th of September, I don't think we were told directly by Israel it was happening. We found out possibly through back channels through our special relationship with the US, but we have, it seems, lost that connection with Israel as obviously an ally, but that deepness of relationship has gone in recent months.
I mean, it was only a couple of days ago, a few days ago, that Benjamin Netanyahu was saying that Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, and by default the United Kingdom, had blood on its hands for recognising the state of Palestine before the ceasefire had even kicked in. I just wonder if we can look back on this and think this is an opportunity missed. A nation is about to be rebuilt, an entire continent is about to come together, and I just don't see us having a meaningful part in that.
Well, I think we've ended up in just the wrong place for the reasons we've discussed, and I think that does sit at the door of Keir Starmer, I'm afraid. A total lack of leadership.
Your leader, Kevin Badenoch, said this morning about this. She said she'll never forget the incomprehensible response from some in the West, that instinct to equivocate, to indulge in whataboutery and draw false equivalence shows how far moral clarity has eroded. All right people know we've got a job to do at home as well as to fix this. What does she mean? Why is she linking home? And what is whataboutery when she says that?
Well, I think the point that she's making is these are very sensitive matters. We know that in our country we've seen a shocking and deeply disturbing rise in anti-Semitism. We've had recent events, which we all know about, which were very shocking indeed. And we need to be getting on top of those kind of issues. And part of that, I think, is the response that the government has generally been taken around matters of Israel and Palestine, which I don't think have served to calm things. I think they probably had quite the opposite effect. And as I say, I think that decision around Palestinian recognition was deeply regrettable.
Live pictures on your screen now at Sharm el-Sheikh, at the airport there, Air Force One. We're awaiting President Donald Trump to step out. We understand that is now moments away. And then, of course, we'll be greeted. There he comes. There is Donald Trump coming down the steps of Air Force One, about to touch down himself on Egyptian soil, being greeted by the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. They'll then be whisked away to sign this historic Gaza peace plan, now been renamed the Trump Peace Plan. And other countries expected to take part in it, as well as, of course, as USA and Egypt, also Qatar, Turkey. And the opportunity here, Chris Hope, as Donald Trump mentioned, a coming together of Arab states, a coming together of Muslim states, even a seat at the table down the line for Iran. which I think now understands if it doesn't toe the line, it will be eviscerated from the face of the earth. Like, if only Joe Biden hadn't sent them billions of dollars across all of those years, we might have reached this place a little bit sooner.
Yeah, that's right. Look at 20 world leaders there in Sharm el-Sheikh to meet President Trump. Of course, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is part of that group. And I mean, you have to go back to how we've got to this position. Would Joe Biden have got to this position, do you think, Sir Mel Stride? In fact, you have got this projection of Ford led to a degree of peace.
Well, it's very hard to know what the counterfactual would have looked like, but I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump in this situation has played America's strength into this situation very, very adroitly, putting pressure both on the Israelis, but also clearly Hamas as well. The actions that he took against Iran in respect to their nuclear facilities, I think, was a clear demonstration of force. And you're right, Chris. I mean, the situation in the Middle East has now been transformed, and those proxies of Iran, both Hamas but also Hezbollah, of course, severely weakened as a consequence of this, and I think that's good. It's interesting, of course, that there's a certain symbolism actually in it being Egypt here where this signing is going to take place, because, of course, one of the enduring peace deals in the region has been between Israel and Egypt, and it does show you what can be done in the longer term if you stick at it and take those tough decisions along the way.
And what's fascinating about all this now is that, again, putting differences to one side, is that now's the time not to dwell on the past, not to dwell on conflicts or perhaps even the huge differences between nations. And there are a huge amount of differences between nations across this region, but they all surely, Donald Trump kept saying, no longer we need to spend billions of dollars on defence, on offence, on iron domes, on air raid shelters. Put that money instead into infrastructure, schools, technology. And while he was at it, making a business pitch for American AI, always trying to get fresh deals, even during peace deals. But Mel Stride, isn't that the point? There's so much opportunity in this region. I put it to you again, we're outside the tent. I find it pretty heartbreaking, to be honest.
I think it's a very unfortunate position we've ended up in, and we've had a discussion a little earlier about why that has happened, but I totally agree with you. I mean, it should be said, of course, there is a long way to go now, even between going from release of hostages, humanitarian aid going in, a partial withdrawal by Israel, and translating that into sound, stable governance across Gaza, let alone reaching a two-state solution. So a long way to go. But absolutely right. I mean, we have a historical connection to that part of the world. We're a power that, whilst medium-sized, does have real assets, particularly on the diplomatic side, to feed into these kind of situations, and we should have been absolutely central to what's going on rather than being several steps removed.
Are we seeing at present, and certainly today, almost a new world order, a complete resetting, and that is America once again just hoving into view as the true global superpower? You know, its military might, its political might, its financial might, and dare I say it, its sheer force of will to get things done, in a sense, has kind of brushed everybody else to one side. And no following of the protocol, which so slowed down previous American regimes. A can-do attitude, if you like, just getting in and getting the job done. And that, by consequence, has meant that everybody else is a bit of a bit player. Am I wrong to conclude from that is there a sense that the sun might be setting on Britain's influence as a global power, or is it just America is so powerful, so dominant, that Donald Trump just got in and said, well, if you guys can't sort it out, I'm going to get the job done?
Well, I think on this one, it's certainly a case that he's brought together America's overwhelming military power and economic power and applied it politically in this situation to what appears to be very, very positive effect. As to the broader picture, of course, there's been a fair element of disengagement from the US in terms of European security, and it's been leaning into and then away from supporting Ukraine. It's been a more of a mixed picture. And I think to your part of your question, Martin, about what does this mean for us, it means that we have got to be stepping up to the plate as one of those middle-ranking powers that shares important values with our American friends and other partners around the world, and is prepared to stand up for those in a strong way in the face particularly of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And that's really where we need to be headed. And that's why, as I say, it's so disappointing that in this particular situation we seem to be the other side of the door rather than around the table with our US allies in this.
And we've also saw, of course, with NATO, Donald Trump just came and said, you're all going to pay 5%. But no more namby-pambying about, no more messing about, no more negotiations. You are going to pay 5% GDP. You're the Chancellor, you're the Shadow Chancellor. No doubt that's a heck of a lot of money. It's going to be very, very difficult to find, but it should have been done years and years and years ago.
Yeah, I mean, now we have most definitely moved on from there being a peace dividend that we did have when the Berlin Wall came down and there were these huge changes at the late 80s, etc. We are now in a very different place. You're right to identify the cost. Every 1% increase in GDP, 1% of GDP increase in defence is about £25 billion, which is a huge, colossal amount of money. But these are the kind of challenges that we're going to have to lean into. And that's, if I could quickly segue into the economy for a moment, and Rachel Reeves and the budget, that's all the more reason why to have had a government that has trashed the economy in the way that they have, whacked up taxes on businesses, borrowed like it's going out of fashion, stoked inflation, kept interest rates high, added to the debt and the servicing costs on the debt, destroyed all the fiscal headroom that chancellors put in place to be prudent, has left us very vulnerable in several different ways. And one of them is in this sort of geopolitical security sense, where to do the kind of things we need to do as a country, needs a strong economy. And if we have a weak economy, then we're fragile in every way.
And they say you caused that mess, don't they?
Well,
let's be honest about it. Your government in power till last July caused the mess.
We would have made, Chris, we would have made very different decisions had we been in power. We wouldn't have taxed the living daylights out of business, because that's how you destroy growth. We wouldn't have talked down the economy with this fictitious black hole that they confected, which also extinguished the animal spirits. We would have driven much harder on productivity. All these pay rises for trade union paymasters around the place, with no strings attached to the doctors and the train drivers and so on, and got on top of spending, particularly welfare spending. And I set out at our recent conference £47 billion worth of savings, and that allows you to cut taxes, allows you to grow the economy. And that's fundamentally what they've got wrong.
Yeah. If you're just joining us now on GB News, live pictures on your screen. If you're listening on the radio, I'll talk you through them. We're seeing a caravan of magnificent limousines. They truly are. I mean, everyone who watches this show knows I do get excited about presidential limousines, saluting them at Windsor Castle. I was told with the wrong hand. Do you know what? I had such a childlike sense of excitement. I don't care. On a serious point, we are now seeing Donald Trump rolling towards the palace where the deal will be signed, the Gaza peace plan, presently in caravan with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for this next stage. Just so you're aware, Donald Trump was due to leave Egypt at 3 p.m. We were led to believe on the show earlier on we'd be saying sayonara to the president as he left, but of course the speeches, the celebrations in Israel early on simply rolled on and on and on, and we are now some 3 hours behind schedule, Chris. So it is Donald Trump, it's his party. He'll be as late as he wants to be.
Well, the motorcade's on its way now, but of course we're seeing Sir Keir Starmer there with Emmanuel Macron, Giorgia Meloni. I mean, all the key players there from the United Nations are there. They're all sitting around having repeated bilateral meetings with each other, trying to work out what other business they can conclude while they're waiting there.
And repeated croissants, because he was meant to be there hours ago and he simply isn't.
Of course, but also back where they've flown from, we're still looking at images now, both from Gaza and from Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv in Hostages Square, we're still waiting, I think, for another 19 bodies to come home, 4 today. All the live hostages are now back, thank goodness. On the right there, you're seeing images from Gaza, where they're receiving some of the near 2,000 Palestinian prisoners now released in exchange. So they're leaving behind a lot of human drama, these world leaders, of course, but they're planning for the future. I mean, you're looking again at that motorcade as it approaches the resort event where it'll be held.
One of the power plays of politics, Sir Mel Stride, that I've found so fascinating about every time Donald Trump welcomes a world leader to the White House, and now here we are. Can you imagine being those other world leaders just waiting for him to arrive now?
Yes.
I mean, you've been in politics a long time, Mel Stride. This must be squeaky bum time. if you're Emmanuel Macron there, if you're Ursula von der Leyen, let's face it, political minnows compared to Donald Trump, some people might say, I mean, in comes the beast.
Yeah.
How do you negotiate with somebody like Donald Trump?
Very, very carefully, I think. I mean, he is very transactional, so and he is somebody, I think, for whom personal relationships matter a great deal. So I think the answer to your question is the first thing is to get on with him at a personal level, get the chemistry right, and secondly, understand that for him it's all about deal making and look at arrangements through that prism, I think.
And it started so well, I think, you know, irrespective of what you personally think, Sir Mel, about Sir Keir Starmer, when he fished that envelope out of his pocket, and I have in my pocket an invite from King Charles. It was a very clever political power play, because what do you get a billionaire who can afford everything? The answer is something money can't buy.
Yeah.
A royal
Well, and
invite.
it demonstrates the value, the soft power that our royal family projects around the world. Is you cannot buy that. You can't resurrect that or create it in any other place. It's 1,000 years or more of history. And it's all embodied in all the pomp and circumstance that goes with it, the pageantry and the...
Yes, I was there in the Oval Office when it happened, and...
Yeah. You were in the office?
Yeah, we were in the Oval Office, literally about 3 metres away.
It was very, very clever, flattering politics.
Well, the atmosphere lifted, because until that point, it was you didn't know what was going to happen. Suddenly, the envelope came out almost a bit too soon in the meeting, I felt, but clearly that just lifted the whole tone. And clearly Donald Trump was amazed by that, and that really went to the heart of the guy, I think.
And yet, here we are today, as the motorcade pulls in to the luxury environment where this peace deal will be signed. You still can't help but think, Chris, and I know I keep banging on about this, but I really think Britain now could be on the front row. And yeah, I just feel like we're outside, sort of, trying to get noticed, stamping our feet, and ridiculously claiming on primetime political TV that we were playing a huge part behind the scenes. Well, how far behind the scenes? Well, 25 miles?
That was made by British Phillips, and she was mocked, and she was in fact insulted by the US ambassador to Israel. But that is claimed by Number 10. That is claimed that Jonathan Powell, the NSA, the National Security Advisor, was behind the scenes. I should say, in defence of the UK, Martin, seeing he's making me do this. I mean, we are on the P5. We are members of the 5 members of the Permanent Security Council. We are probably about as influential as France are, and Emmanuel Macron is there. I mean, you're struggling.
About as influential as France are now.
Is that insulting?
How does that make you feel?
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it?
You're trying to draw me into creating huge, vast international conflict, aren't you, between us and our allies, even? Let's just celebrate this moment. I think it's rare in world politics, isn't it, where something as positive as what we're seeing here is actually happening. Our thoughts have to be with those hostages who have been released, the Israeli hostages. Clearly there will be euphoria with them and their loved ones, but if you've gone through 737 days of that, the psychological impacts will be significant. So our thoughts are with them, not just now, but over the coming months and years, actually. Yeah.
We just see you there. These are live pictures of the presidential limousine pulled up, expecting the world leader, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to emerge any moment now to go inside and start signing this historic peace deal inside. There we have the live pictures now. We can get a bit closer in. There we go. Live pictures, Donald Trump about to emerge and go inside. There he is. That is President Trump striding in, some 3 hours and 50 minutes late. It's Donald Trump. He's late for everything, but you don't switch off to miss it. It's like waiting for Rod Stewart, isn't it? We say this every single time, Chris. So no one's going to go home early.
Listen, no one minds this. He absolutely deserved his moment in the Knesset. It was deeply moving watching those repeated ovations from him by a grateful nation. I mean, why wouldn't you want to milk that, be part of it, enjoy it? And the language, again, the skies are calm, guns are silent, sirens are still. That has happened on his watch. You can argue, and many are arguing, he's made that happen with his projection of force and his deal-making ability, and that's his absolute credit.
So, Mel Stride, they say that sorry is the hardest word. I wonder if thank you is the hardest phrase for so many people to say towards Donald Trump. It doesn't matter what you think about Donald Trump. Surely political differences can be put to one side and say what he's achieved in a short period of time has been truly momentous.
I think on this particular issue, this particular moment, absolutely. I think we have to hand it to the US president. I think he has acted very skillfully. He's used all the assets that America has, it seems to me, applied the pressure exactly properly between the two sides of this conflict, and clearly we've now arrived at this point, at least, which is phenomenally positive. Of course, people will reserve judgment on other things that he may do around the world. Certainly, economically, there are some fairly tough things he's been doing around tariffs, for instance. But right now, in this place, at this moment, I think we should recognise the extent of his achievement. Yeah.
Thanks, Sir Melstride. Thanks for joining us today in the studio in Westminster. To dash off now, you're a very, very busy man, but thank you for joining us in this truly momentous day in history. Shadow Chancellor Sir Melstride, thanks for your time.
Great pleasure, Martin.
Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you. And let's draw my next guest now. And let's go to Tel Aviv and speak to the senior fellow at the Foundation for Defence and Democracies, and that is Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, welcome to the show. We see historic pictures on our screen now, both from Tel Aviv. The mood somewhat dampened now, of course, because 20 living hostages were earlier released, and we understand that Hamas has not kept its side of the deal today in releasing all of the bodies of the deceased hostages.
Yes, good evening. And thank you for having me on. Of course, it's less festive now, and people are perhaps starting to go home because it's a Jewish holiday. That's one thing. And a second thing is that, as you said very correctly, there was great anticipation to get 28 bodies back, and Hamas have decided, for whatever reason, still unclear why, only to return 4. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of cries in Israel now to say, well, if Hamas isn't living up to their part of the deal, there needs to be swift sanctions. We got to, mark the situation here and not allow Hamas to get away with it. But we haven't seen any Israeli action as a result so far.
What's your take, if I may ask you, about the broader importance or not of nations such as the United Kingdom? It's fair to say, is it not, that the tensions between the two nations, between Israel and the United Kingdom, have come to the fore recently, with Sir Keir Starmer backing the recognition of the state of Palestine? Do you think the United Kingdom has played its hand wrong?
I think that the British government, and I say this with respect, I think has made wrong choices. It's an appeasement policy that has tried to appease local jihadists and local Islamist forces in the UK at the expense of British Jews and at the expense of the Jewish state. And I think it's wrong. I think it will be proven in history to be wrong. And I think that what President Trump has done is actually to overtake that ill-thought effort by the UK, France and Canada and Australia to apply pressure on Israel and to force a so-called Palestinian state down Israel's throat as a matter of punishing Israel. I think that effort is not going to be successful, and there will only be a Palestinian state once the Palestinians have actually built one, once they are ready, once they are forward-looking, once they have made the choice, the cognitive choice to pursue peace and coexistence and stop with this perpetual sensation of victimhood and entitlement that for some reason they still cling on to. And no matter how many powerful countries in the world say there is a Palestinian state, there will only be one in reality once they really earn it. Just like the Jewish state, it wasn't given on a silver platter. It was fought for and earned and built.
We can see live pictures on our screens now. As you say there, Jonathan, the atmosphere more subdued now in Tel Aviv at Hostage Square. Perhaps the realisation is now kicking in that only 4, we understand, of those 28 deceased bodies will be released today. Weirdly, on the Gazan side, they seem to be more jubilant. We can see a constant stream of prisoners by the coachload being released over there.
Well, it's 1,900 versus 20 or 24 in Israel, so it's different ratio here. And if you speak about what's returning to Gaza on the Palestinian side, Sadly, we're talking about repeat offenders, terrorists that were serving multiple life sentences, 250 of them. And sadly, I don't think that they're going to, go back to civilian life. They're going to go back to terror. And I will not be surprised to find them amongst the ranks of this or the other terrorist organization. If they do, I hope that this time when Israel delivers justice, it'll be the kind of justice that cannot be undone by whatever political deal, because they have all of the people, all of the terrorists out of the 250 are terrorists that really murder.
Okay, now we're cutting to live pictures now. This is Donald Trump at that historic meeting. Let's go and listen in.
I want to have a couple of questions. First, we're having an amazing period of time, like I think nobody's seen before. And we had tremendous stop, as you know, in Israel, and now we're in a country where a friend of mine is a very powerful leader, and my friend is right here, the president, also the general, Sometimes usually I call him the general because he's both, and he's good at both. And they've done a fantastic job. And they have very little crime, because they don't play games, that's why. They don't play games like we do in the United States with governors that have no idea what they're doing. But they don't have crime. I ask about crime and they almost don't even know what I'm talking about. So it's a great tribute to this man. He's done a fantastic job in bringing this country together, and the United States is with him all the way. Thank you. Okay, all the way, and it's an honor to be with you.
Sir, what will Egypt's role play in the peace process here?
He played a very important role, and they had a very important role with Hamas. In fact, the general was right here, was very instrumental because Hamas respects this country and they respect the leadership of Egypt. So he played a very important role. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
President Trump, in Israel just now, you were talking about a possible Iran peace deal. You said, we are ready when you are. Yeah. Is that the ultimate goal with today's signing, to get enough?
Not Iran, but I think Iran will come along. They've been battered and bruised, and they need some help. They have big sanctions, as you know, tremendous sanctions. I'd love to take the sanctions off when they're ready to talk. But they can't really survive with those sanctions. Those sanctions are very tough. But at some point they're going to say, we want the sanctions off. We're going to end up with peace. I think Iran is going to be fine. I know so many Iranian people. They're great people. They're smart, great people. Engineers, lawyers, they're academics. But they took a big hit. And frankly, if we didn't hit them with the nuclear, I don't think you would have been able to have this incredible, this deal, this once-in-a-lifetime deal. Nobody's ever seen anything like what's happening today. And countries have all come together, all different countries. Some liked each other, some didn't, most didn't. And they've all come together. Every country has come together. And by the way, Iran did put out a statement, that they support this deal very wholeheartedly. So that was in itself something. But no, I think they want to, that's all I do in my life. I make deals. And they want to make a deal.
President Trump, now that the living hostages have been returned, can you please tell us what the next steps are to phase two?
Well, they're going and looking for bodies. It's a pretty gruesome task. And they know where numerous are, as you know. I guess 5 or 6 are in yet now. But they're looking for bodies. They know the areas, and they search parties out, and they're doing it in conjunction with Israel. And they're going to be finding quite a few of them.
President Trump, can you tell us when phase 2 of the negotiations will begin?
Well, it started. It started as far as we're concerned. Phase 2 has started. And, the phases are all a little bit mixed in with each other. They're going to start cleaning up. If you look at Gaza, it needs a lot of cleanup. That's why when I talked in my speech, I talked about the debris. I used the word debris. That's debris times 10. So, but they're going to really do a job. They have a lot of power. In another room, you have some of the wealthiest nations in the world. All leaders, the big leaders are here. the emirs and the kings and everybody, and it's a very interesting group. I guess we have like 35 countries, and that's only because they were the 35 that we invited. Everybody that we invited came. So there's a lot of respect. And I think you'll see some tremendous progress, both in the Middle East. This country is doing very well. It has good leadership. It's about leadership. And it's really nice when you say, how is your crime situation? And they don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean crime? We don't have crime. Because if he has crime, he puts it out very quickly. Some people think that's not nice, but I think it's great. Because people don't want to be mugged and smashed, and they don't want to be stupid people. They have a place that is doing very well. We're very proud of him, because we knew each other from the beginning. The first time I met, it was in a hotel, and I was going to meet him, and then Hillary Clinton was following me. Remember Hillary Clinton? And he liked me so much, he never even got to see Hillary. He saw her for about 2 seconds. But he didn't really want to waste a lot of time. He knew what was going to happen. But that was the first time we met, and we had a very good chemistry together. And it continues till today. So I want to thank you all very much. I appreciate the way you covered this really momentous, I've never seen anything like it. The level of love, the level of respect for what it is, and it's peace in the Middle East, and everybody said it's not possible to do, and it's going to happen, and it is happening as before your very eyes, and that's why it's become so fascinating. Marco, do you have anything to say?
Egypt's been a phenomenal participant. I think both Steve and Jared will tell you the critical role they played, and they can tell you themselves. They hosted the talks here, and they're going to play a very important role now in the follow-up, the implementation of this, which is really, it's not simply about restoring Gaza, it is about transforming the region. So we have an incredible partner, a long alliance, a very capable partner here, and a tremendous collection of leaders. This is clearly, in my mind, I think in the mind of everyone in this room, probably one of the most important days for world peace in 50 years. And that's not an exaggeration.
Only 50?
Maybe 100. Certainly since the end of World War II, Mr. President.
Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner, I'm curious, you played such an important role in the tactical negotiations here. What will your role be going forward as a lot more has to be brought to the table here?
Oh, the minute we had inked the deal, Jared and I were already working on the implementation side of the deal. So we're dug in. We'll be here quite a bit. That's at the direction of the president. That's probably going to be one of the most important phases here. Jared is remarkable to work with. I talk about it all the time. And of course, we both love working for the president. So it's feels like a very honorable job.
Mr. President, would you like to say something with the interpreter?
Yes. اسمحوا لي في البداية أن أنا أرحب بفخامة الرئيس. وأنا سعيد وكل شرف موجودة في شرم الشيخ مدينة السلام. يسمح لي فخامة الرئيس أن أنا اسمي وباسم كل المصريين ويمكن حتى بكل محب السلام نوجه لك التحية الأخيرة والاحترام على تحقيق هذا الإنجاز الرائع والعظيم.
Well, first of all, Your Excellency, I welcome you to Egypt. It's a great pleasure and an honor to have you with us here in the city of peace, Sharm el-Sheikh. Allow me also to extend, on behalf of all Egyptians and peace lovers around the world, salute, the appreciation, and the respect for this unprecedented and momentous accomplishment by your hands.
أنا كنت متأكد فخامة الرئيس أنك الوحيد القادر على تحقيق هذا الإنجاز وإنهائه.
I've been very confident that Your Excellency is the only one who is capable of bringing this about and bringing an end to this war.
وأنا في خلال اتصالي بفخامة الرئيس ذكرت له ذلك بدقة. قلت له فخامة الرئيس أنت وحدك القادر على تحقيق السلام في منطقتنا.
I even said that very precisely during my communication with Your Excellency, that you are the only one who is able to bring about peace and to achieve peace in this part.
بشكرك فخامة الرئيس.
I thank you, Mr. President.
ولكن عايزين نستكمل نثبت وقف إطلاق النار ونطلق السراح كل الرهائن وحتى يعني للاسف الجثث المتبقيه في اسرع وقت عشان تسلم الى ذويهم في اسرائيل ثم ادخال المساعدات ونستكمل باقي المراحل.
And what we need to do now is to fixate the ceasefire, make sure that it maintains the status, that we can deliver all of the remaining, the bodies of the deceased to their families, and this is very important, to bring in more humanitarian assistance into the strip, and working very closely on following up the rest of the steps that should be taken to make this successful.
Mr. President, you did very great. Thank you.
That's very nice. Thank you.
He's a good man. Thank you. He's a good man. We're with him all the way.
Will he be on the board of peace, sir?
I'd like to have him on the board. I'd like to. We may need an interpreter, but that's okay.
As long as the President, His Excellency, presides the Board of Peace, I'll be there.
We've had many leaders want to be on the board, actually. The Board of Peace, it's taken on, Steve, I'd say a life of its own. Do you want to discuss that, what's happened?
I think we have a long list of applicants to be on that board.
Everybody wants to. That's very nice. That's better than the other way. Usually it's the other way. Nobody wants to be on the board. But it's really taken on. This whole thing has taken on a life that's very different. So it's been really a great honor. And you people have done a fantastic job. I want to tell you that we appreciate it very much. Rusty. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right, thank you.
Hold it 1 second.
أنا عايز دعم فخامة الرئيس ورعايته معانا في مؤتمر إعادة الأمن.
I just want and look forward to Your Excellency's support and your sponsorship with us in the conference for the Reconstruction.
Thank you. 100%. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, Brad. You guys, let's go. Thanks, guys. Let's head out.
Donald Trump. That was Donald Trump there giving a speech with the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, talking about the huge relationship between the two countries. And it was interesting how the president there kept referring to Donald Trump as Your Excellency. Yeah. Thanked him on behalf of all Egyptians around the world. You're the only one, Your Excellency, who is capable of ending the war and bringing about peace. And now they go off to sign that historic peace deal. The Gaza peace deal has already been renamed the Trump peace deal. Let's bring in now our Homeland Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, who's been resting your vocal cords. You've been doing a sterling performance today. Mark White, we can see live pictures on our screen now of Tel Aviv. A somewhat more muted atmosphere there now as the realisation is sinking in that the full bodies of the 28 missing hostages will not be now released today.
Yes, Donald Trump alluded to that in the news conference, the difficulty that there is, and we're looking at live pictures there out into the desert as that process begins of repatriating some of the remains of those hostages. But because of the circumstances, clearly many killed within the tunnel systems under Gaza, that means that for some the remains are buried under tons of rubble. It may be very difficult, if not impossible, to actually get to the remains of some of the hostages, which is just clearly absolutely devastating for any family to hear that. But we've got to wait, clearly, in the hours and days ahead to see how many of the 28 hostage bodies or remains they can repatriate back to Israel. Martin, for those 20 hostages who are still alive, former hostages now back in Israel, it has been the most emotional day for them and for their families as well. We want to bring you some video that the Israel Defense Forces have just put out on social media. I feel I should put out a warning because it's so emotional to watch. It's not distressing, but it's deeply emotional. If we've got that ready, I'd like to play that for you now. It's hard not to be so deeply moved just watching those images coming out of Israel, what these families have been through these last 2 years. And for them, at least, there is reconciliation, a reunion with their loved ones.
And Mark White, just to explain to listeners there who were listening in, there was footage of released hostages being reunited with their loved ones. And, you know, Mark White, we saw some video earlier on of one of them looking out from a coach as they were brought back into Tel Aviv. And it's just incredibly emotional to see how emaciated and gaunt and ghost-like and pale they are. Because, of course, no doubt they spend a huge amount of their time, all of it, in captivity, if not even underground, in tunnels. And the noises coming from those people there, the best way of explaining it, I guess, Mark White, is just one of being utterly overwhelmed and emotional, and also a sense of absolute disbelief that after 737 days, this nightmare is finally over.
Yeah, I mean, it's just visceral emotion, isn't it? You know, clearly they just couldn't control just that absolute surge of relief and sorrow and love for those individuals that they probably, on many occasions over the last 738 days, felt that they might not see again. And here they are, back in their arms, and hopefully now beginning that slow process of rehabilitation, that process of trying to come to terms with what has happened to them psychologically, and just rebuild their lives after 2 years away from their families and being subjected to unspeakable trauma, without a doubt, deep in the tunnel systems below Gaza. As we say, 28 of their fellow hostages didn't make it to see this day. It has to be hoped that as many of the hostage remains as possible can be repatriated for the families, to at least give them a burial, to know that they're finally at rest.
Mark White, a statement's just been released by the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. They're basically saying that Hamas has violated the agreement. They said that they hope there should be Hamas's violation of the agreement must be met with a very serious response from the government, and the mediators. An agreement must be honoured by both sides. If Hamas does not fulfil their part, then Israel should not fulfil its part either. We demand all 28 hostages back. We will not give up on anyone until the last hostage is returned. So there we see the Hostages and Missing Families Forum perhaps intimating that Israel stop releasing prisoners as its side of the bargain. And Chris Hope, you've got a quick word on that.
Well, yeah, the Defence Minister, Israel Katz, is saying this in the past few moments. Hamas' announcement of the expected return of 4 bodies today, not 28, 4 bodies today, constitutes a failure to meet its commitments. Any delay or deliberate avoidance will be considered a blatant violation of the agreement and will be met accordingly. Now, that is worrying. While peace talks are going on in Sharm el-Sheikh, to have that kind of bellicose language from Israel Katz, concerned about these outstanding 24 bodies. We understand they can't find some of them, but let's have a clear line there from Hamas.
OK, let's bring in my next guest now. He's been very patiently waiting on the line for us from Washington, D.C. And that's the research fellow at the International Security Programme, Azim Ibrahim, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show, Mr. Ibrahim. Always a pleasure to have your esteemed company. Could I get your initial reaction? Let's go back in time to the incredible speech by Donald Trump earlier on today, and history truly has been made in the Middle East.
Yeah, Martin, without a doubt, this is a historic achievement by President Trump. President Trump is often accused of using a lot of bluster, but I think in this occasion it's definitely merited. I cannot have seen this happen under any other president. He has forced this through by the sheer strength of his personality. He's been described as a bulldozer. He forced this through by threatening Hamas unprecedented destruction, and at the same time by cutting off Netanyahu and negotiating directly with Hamas and then imposing the agreement upon Netanyahu. All sides obviously claim that they're emerging out of this victorious, but the reality is the great victory belongs to Donald Trump here.
And Azim Ibrahim, we just no doubt overheard us there saying the intense frustration, heartbreak, disappointment being voiced by the Hostages and Missing Families Forum in Tel Aviv, saying already in this fragile and fresh and tenderly young peace process, saying that they want Israel to stop giving prisoners back to Palestine, because already they're claiming that Hamas must have known they couldn't have returned all these bodies today, and yet they proceeded.
Yeah, well, Hamas's claim is that they don't know where all the bodies are. They've lost control over a lot of the different cells that are operating within Gaza, and so they need a bit more time. But I think you're going to see a lot of that now in the coming days, of violations from both sides, that they're not living up to their agreements. But the reality is the success of this will be completely determined by how much the United States is engaged and how much President Trump is personally engaged in this. He is not a president to be trifled with. Unlike other presidents, he does not operate within the same kind of system. He does what he wants. And I think it'll be a mistake from either side to kind of try to violate the agreement, and bring ire to President Trump.
And we can see live pictures on our screens now, Azim Ibrahim, of the sun going down, the first sunset over that the new peace over Gaza. Donald Trump said earlier on in the day, an historic dawn of a new Middle East, and yet as the sun sets, the same dogged problems persevere, of broken promises, of words not being kept. But Azim Ibrahim, looking forward now to what's going on in Egypt. We're seeing various world leaders clamouring for a position. Could I ask you specifically what you think about the United Kingdom's role in this, and in particular a question I've been asking to guests over the past weeks and months, but certainly today. Did the United Kingdom pick the wrong side and play a bad hand in all of this?
Well, the UK's role in this is under question. On the one hand, you have Keir Starmer claiming some sort of credit of working behind the scenes. We do know his national security advisor, Jonathan Powell, was involved in some of this. But the reality is, Martin, that the UK really does not have much influence in this at all. The US is the key driver behind all of this, and what will happen and the outcome of all of this will be completely determined by what President Trump decides. The UK and Europe is just really, in reality, just not very relevant. The countries in the region are involved. There's a lot of Muslim majority countries that are involved who hopefully provide peacekeeping troops on the ground to keep the ceasefire intact. Many of them are very inexperienced in terms of peacekeeping missions, but nevertheless, their contribution will be very important. Europe, the UK are just not as relevant anymore in this entire equation.
What's next with Iran? What's been incredible again? We haven't heard any of the bellicose language from the Ayatollahs you'd normally expect to hear. They've been trying to rain on the parade. They've been absolutely resolutely silent today. Donald Trump even intimating that if you want a stable peace, phase one was the evisceration of the Iranian nuclear program with a formidable display of air power, those B-2 bombers. And by the way, Donald Trump just casually let slip in Tel Aviv earlier on that he's ordered 28 more of them. That's $117 billion worth. America has been making the most enormous military and power flex perhaps we've seen in recent history here.
Yeah, well, Iran has realised that they have lost this equation. And, if peace emerges in the Middle East, Iran will be the biggest loser and they'll be completely isolated. And it's actually, it's great that the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh is involving all the regional leaders, all Middle Eastern leaders, and there are obviously questions about whether Netanyahu himself will attend. He initially said he would on the invitation of the president, and then 30 minutes later he said he will not because there's a Jewish holiday. But in the eventuality that he does, or he sends a representative, this will be also a very great historic achievement, the fact that you have Netanyahu sitting across the table from other Middle Eastern leaders, and hopefully that will be the foundation of lasting peace in the entire Middle East. And in that eventuality, Iran will be completely isolated. I think the best thing for them to do in that situation is simply to try to get on board with this peace agreement and not sow division in the region, because that simply hasn't worked out for them.
Is it possible to have a lasting peace in the Middle East so long as the Ayatollahs, the Islamic regime, is in power, in place in Iran? Or is it better just to try and get the job done, to force them out of power, to try and get Iran back to the prosperous, democratic, free nation it was before the Islamic uprising?
Yeah, well, Iran is completely isolated now. I think what the US should really be doing is to trying to force through a normalization of the region between Israel and the rest of the Arab countries, and also create a roadmap to a Palestinian state that is governed without Hamas, without the extremists, and with all the countries involved. And in that eventuality, Iran will simply realise that they have lost this ongoing battle. This is a country that has sown division and sown chaos throughout the entire region, and so they have great limitations placed upon them if peace throughout the whole of the Middle East breaks out.
Superb. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for patiently waiting. It's a very, very busy day. That's the research fellow, the International Security Programme, Azim Ibrahim, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, just to talk you through what we're seeing on our screens now, that is the Peace in the Middle East Summit there in Egypt. Of course, that is Sharm el-Sheikh, and we're waiting for all those world leaders to come out. You can see the various flags for, no doubt, Donald Trump will be taking centre stage and delivering what's going to be signed in this next stage of the agreement. Now, somebody else who's been waiting very patient to join us is Ben Leo. Ben Leo, of course, joins us now from Washington, D.C., GBNews presenter, The Late Show Live. Ben Leo, well, you got your umbrella up, your GBNews umbrella. It's wonderful to see you're flying the flag. But look, there's no denying who the true leader of the free world is today. Everybody else on that stage in Israel can posture all they like, but the leader of the free world, once again, is the United States, and that man, Donald J. Trump, at the helm.
Yeah, and I was just hearing your line there, Martin, about Trump ordering, was it more than 100 more B-2 bombers? Goodness me, if that doesn't show a sign of intent and authority on the world stage, I don't know what does. But yeah, it's an incredible day, not just for the Middle East, Martin, but for the world, you'd argue, as well. President Trump, of course, was called a Nazi. He was called a Hitler. Well, isn't it ironic that now that person who was called Hitler brings peace to the Middle East and secures the longevity of the Jews in Israel as well. There was an interesting conversation on Air Force One yesterday as President Trump left Washington, D.C., headed for Jerusalem. He was asked by a reporter whether, and I love this, whether he thought he'd get into heaven based off the situation in Gaza now, the achievement that he's bagged with peace in Israel and Gaza. And it was a fascinating response. This is what he said. President Trump was asked whether he thinks after this he'll get into heaven. Take a look.
You know, I'm being a little cute. I don't think there's anything going to get me in heaven. Okay, I really don't. I think I'm not maybe heaven bound. I may be in heaven right now as we fly in Air Force One. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make heaven, but I've made life a lot better for a lot of people.
Yeah, so who knows, Martin, whether President Trump will make it to heaven. There's lots of people today in the United States, in Israel and all around the world who I guess would argue, yeah, of course you deserve to get a place in heaven, not least now after ending, according to the Trump administration, 8 wars, 8 conflicts around the world. This, of course, is the highlight. The other one would be Pakistan and India, 2 nuclear superpowers, which he sorted out very swiftly. And breaking now, Martin, this is a GB News exclusive from our very own Bev Turner. She's tweeted a couple of minutes ago, our Bev, saying, I'm hearing that President Trump may be meeting Zelensky of Ukraine at the White House on Friday. Can he end 2 wars in 1 week? It's exactly the sort of slam dunk he would relish. Follow it all on GB News. So Bev Turner there, highly sourced sources in the White House. Bev, of course, is very well connected here in DC. Suggesting that Zelensky will now be coming into the White House on Friday. Could we be seeing, Martin, a 9th war ended under President Trump, the so-called peace president now? If Zelensky's presence at the White House is anything to do with ending the war, goodness me, I don't know what the Democrats would say, those with Trump derangement syndrome. Even today, Martin, those with TDS can't bring themselves to mention Trump's name. Elizabeth Warren, a leading Democrat here in the US, Trump would probably describe her as a far-left liberal lunatic, but she tweeted a few minutes ago talking about the end of the war in Gaza. Still couldn't bring herself to name President Trump in that. So, yeah, a GB News exclusive there. Bev Turner, her sources in the White House suggesting Zelensky could be in town on Friday, and it could be, maybe, pending the end of the war in Ukraine as well.
That would be a truly astonishing moment. Zelensky there. We hear from Bev Turner in the White House on Friday. Ben, could I ask you, one thing I'm so fascinated about when people you're right there, the crucible of power, you know, America flexing its muscles politically, militarily, financially, in a way that I think is just genuinely just mind-blowing. They were saying today, Donald Trump, we got rid of ISIS in 3.5 weeks. We were told it wasn't possible. We just went in, we got it done. First of all, we bombed them. We just got the job done. And just talking again about this endless kind of reordering of military hardware, and everybody in that room just watching thinking, wow, you know, if I'm one of Donald Trump's opponents, what's the point? I'm going to be wiped off the face of the earth. I want to ask you, you say there are people with Trump derangement syndrome, but a lot of people that I'm hearing from who voted for Donald Trump, they can't believe their luck. They've got a president who actually is good for his word. He said he was going to end wars, and it could be 9 by Friday.
Yep, there's such a enthusiasm here in DC and all across America. Since I've been here 5 or 6 weeks, I've been to Arizona, Philadelphia, New York, West Virginia. I've travelled around a little bit, and there is such an enthusiasm for this administration of just getting things done. Yes, maybe in yesteryear, President Trump, just with his, you know, the way he speaks to people, the language he uses, because, you know, he's like no other politician we've had before. He's so open, he's so transparent. Maybe sometimes he would have rubbed people up the wrong way with his openness and kind of throwing out the old guard of the way politicians used to handle themselves. But Americans on the whole, from what I've met here, they are so proud of this president, the way they're getting things done, the way he's putting the National Guard on the streets in various crime-ridden cities. He highlights problems and then delivers solutions. And I was just speaking to my cameraman, Ben, off air a minute ago, and I was saying, look, I was said a couple of years ago, and I was scoffed at by some people by saying President Trump, I think, will go down as one of the most, if not greatest, at least the most influential presidents that America has ever seen. And we were talking about maybe whether it would, you know, that kind of vibe and that lift in the mojo would disappear once President Trump hangs up his boots. And I guess you've got the likes of J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who can pick up the mantle. They'll continue that sort of MAGA way of running things, the openness. But you'll never get another president like President Trump again. You'll get maybe MAGA light, President Trump light. But yeah, I think even though I was scoffed at, Martin, a couple of years ago by saying he'll be up there with the greats, I think many more people today at least will kind of go along with that kind of consensus.
Sorry is the hardest word to say. It isn't. It's thank you. I'm not hearing anybody say thank you on the BBC. I'm not hearing anybody say thank you on CNN, all around the world. Even on one of these truly momentous days in world history, they can't say thank you. Ben Leo, I'm going to let you go now before you get blown off into the ether there in Washington, D.C. Hanging on to your hat, Ben Leo, superb. Tune into the Late Show Live. Great exclusive there from Bev Turner, by the way. Just to repeat that, I'm hearing from sources that President Trump may be meeting Zelensky at the White House on Friday. Could he end 2 wars in 1 week? Exactly the sort of slam dunk that he would relish. Ben Leo, thank you very much for joining us live from Washington, D.C. Back to studio, still here with our political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, live pictures on our screen now. It appears to be, that's a sunset there over Gaza. Donald Trump earlier on had said an historic dawn of a new Middle East is rising now. The sun's setting on that first day. And it looks like pictures on the right-hand side there is that of that's of hostages being, we think, moved between the two nations. We're not quite sure which way. But anyway, let's get back, if we could, to the next phase of the politics. Chris Hope, we had pictures a short while ago there of all the amassed flags of the world leaders. Of course, they're in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, about to sign the so-called Gaza peace plan, now been called the Trump peace plan. Who's there? What's going to happen next? And what does it all mean?
So who isn't there is quite interesting. So we know that Israel isn't there because Benjamin Netanyahu has a Jewish festival tonight, so he says he can't go. There's no one there from Hamas either. They're being represented by Qatar and Egypt, and no one from Iran either. So almost the three principal representatives you might feel there are not there. And that's probably because this is a story in Sharm el-Sheikh about rebuilding Gaza, about an aid story. So you have the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer there. You have Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, he's there. Mahmoud Abbas is there. Of course, he runs the Palestinian Authority. Other names too, well known to our viewers: Emmanuel Macron from France, Recep Tayyip Erdogan from Turkey, Pedro Sanchez from Spain, Italy's PM, Giorgia Meloni, the European President, Antonio Costa, the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, the Arab League leader, Ahmed Abdul Gehit, Jordan's King Abdullah. It goes on. The leaders of Kuwait, Bahrain, Indonesia, Azerbaijan, Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Greece's leader, Armenia's leader, Hungary's leader, Pakistan's Prime Minister, and Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, as well as the Norway's PM Jonas Gahr Store. So, in a sense, this is a group of leaders lining up in front of those flags you saw earlier. I did spot the Union flag there, by the way, for those who couldn't look that closely. That was there. They're lining up to say, right, the world will get behind the nascent Palestine state and help it rebuild. Whether it goes to the level which Donald Trump wants, which is this kind of idea of a Riviera next to Israel, it will certainly be supported with lots of money. I mean, billions of money. We heard from Donald Trump to the Knesset earlier. He said Arab states are lining up to tip billions and billions of pounds into Gaza, and boy, does it need it.
Meanwhile, I think I heard, was it £20 million that
so far?
That's Sir Keir Starmer.
Maybe a down payment on a future number, Martin.
£20 million so far donated by Sir Keir Starmer by the United Kingdom. Of course, that won't go very far in a rebuilding process. And I think that's to my next point, that the true power across this Middle Eastern new power bloc, of course, will be the oil-rich nations. Donald Trump said when he was with Benjamin Netanyahu in the Israeli parliament earlier on that the sums of money taken to rebuild Palestine, Gaza, are astronomical, but these compared to the GDP of countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the oil-rich nations, not a great deal of money. Conversation then turns to what will they want in return. Now, we have heard about, a new Trump Tower, the Riviera of the Middle East. Is that likely? Or are we naive, Chris, to expect that suddenly the guns will fall silent and Palestine will just become a nice, democratised state? Or very much, we're seeing today hundreds, in fact 1,900 hostages released, and we spoke to a correspondent from Tel Aviv who he believes that the terrorists might start to regroup.
Well, today is a day of hope. Today is a day we hope that the terrorists won't regroup. There are people are hurt on both sides. It's important that they do come together. £20 million is really aid money, so it's spending money on supporting, on trying to alleviate the suffering in Gaza. The UK has said it's trying to work with private companies to encourage private investment into Gaza. While we've been speaking, Emmanuel Macron has met with the Prime Minister, so the French President with the UK Prime Minister. They both have paid tribute to the efforts of Donald Trump and the mediators from Qatar, Egypt and Turkey in securing this first phase of peace, but it should mark a turning point, they say, for the region, and attention must focus on the next stage. And here's where it's, I think, quite significant what they're saying now in this statement released from Number 10 moments ago. The UK stands ready, they say, to play a leadership role in the process of decommissioning Hamas, then supporting the reconstruction of Gaza and participating in a ceasefire monitoring mission. So clearly the UK sees a role for itself. Now, Bridget Phillipson was mocked the weekend, the Education Secretary, for suggesting we've had a role in this peace process, but we are told by Downing Street that Jonathan Powell, the NSA, the National Security Advisor, was involved behind the scenes. And just finally, to go to the point of Beverly Turner, our presenter in the US of the Late Show Live, they say this on Ukraine. This is Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer. They say, turning to Ukraine, the pair discussed continuing the momentum from today to drive forward a just and lasting peace in Ukraine and look forward to convening a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing soon. That implies there could be some news out on Ukraine as well as Gaza.
OK, thank you very much, Chris Hope. Now, thank you for waiting patiently for the first time on the show. Let's go now directly to our latest news bulletins.
Martin, thank you, and a very good afternoon to you. Just after 4:30. The historic dawn of a new Middle East. That is how the President Donald Trump has described the end of the Gaza war today. It comes as Israel confirmed the final 20 living hostages held by Hamas are now safely home. In exchange, nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners have been released, but the deal is already under strain. Hamas has only so far handed over 2 bodies, claiming it can't locate the rest. Well, Israel's defence minister says Hamas has now breached the Trump peace plan, which required all hostages, alive or dead, to be returned within 72 hours. Despite those challenges, though, Donald Trump says that today is an incredible triumph for the world, insisting the deal will, he says, bring peace for all eternity.
And after so many years of unceasing war and endless danger, today the skies are calm, the guns are silent, the sirens are still, and the sun rises on a holy land that is finally at peace, a land and a region that will live, God willing, in peace for all eternity.
Meanwhile, the world has arrived in Egypt, where the US president has arrived. We're going to take you live now to scenes of Donald Trump as he greets a number of those world leaders at that peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. Some 20 world leaders gathering, including Keir Starmer, expected to speak later. He is urging his counterparts to seize momentum for that lasting peace in Gaza. He is also expected, among many other world leaders, to announce a significant aid package for Gaza, expected at £20 million from the United Kingdom in aid to Gaza. And it comes after the US Special Envoy for Middle East Peace praised the UK's role in brokering the Gaza ceasefire, calling Jonathan Powell's contribution incredible and tireless. But the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, dismissed Britain's involvement, calling it delusional. Well, as we can see there live from Sharm el-Sheikh, Donald Trump greeting members of that contingency in Egypt. We'll take you back now, though, live to Westminster and Martin Daubney.
Thank you very much, Sam Francis there. First news bulletins of an incredibly busy show. As you can see, Donald Trump centre stage, as you would expect, at the next phase of today's historic peace deal in the Middle East. This is the signing of the so-called Gaza peace plan. It's already been renamed the Trump peace plan. This is cementing a political, financial coalition across all of the Middle East and indeed across all of the world. As you can see there, one by one, world leaders queuing up for a photo with Donald Trump, now giving that customary thumbs up. And this is a truly historic moment where one by one the nations will be committing to this peace plan. Donald Trump was resolute earlier on that to get peace in the region, to have cut through, to get somewhere where nobody previously had managed to go, it would take cooperation between nations that in the past had not really been friends. Arabian nations, Muslim nations, and great concessions made by Israel already. Okay, let's bring in my next guest. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the former Conservative Foreign Secretary, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, for more reaction to the Gaza deal on what would have been Margaret Thatcher's 100th birthday. Sir Malcolm, an absolute pleasure to have your company. We are seeing history unfold before our eyes. Tell us what your hopes are for peace in the Middle East.
Well, I think so far it's gone obviously very well with regard to the release of the hostages. I think it is disturbing that they've been unable to find the remains of a number of the hostages who died. It may be genuine that they can't find them for obvious sort of reasons at the time, but it is still going to leave a blot on this particular day's achievement. But the even more important question is what happens now. And while what we're seeing in Sharm el-Sheikh is very encouraging, the summit that is being brought together, that shows that Donald Trump is continuing to give priority to this issue. I hope they don't get too much time on the ceremonial and concentrate far more on what is the most crucial first stage, and that is finding some people who are going to police the land in Gaza that the Israelis have withdrawn from, to make sure Hamas does not reoccupy that territory, because that would be fatal.
And so, Malcolm, we are already seeing pictures on our screen here of each world leader one by one queuing up for, I guess, a selfie with Donald
yes,
J.
and
Trump.
That's all very impressive. It's good that Donald Trump has been able to bring together. It's not so much the world leaders. The most crucial part of this are the leaders from other parts of the Middle East. And just the Arab states, of course, it's also Turkey, because Turkey has probably more influence with Hamas than most of the rest do. And it's going to be very crucial that Hamas is forced to keep to its commitment that it's going to have no part in the governance of Gaza from now on. And that means obviously not allowing its militia, those who survive, to wander around the streets of those parts of Gaza which the Israelis have withdrawn from with their weapons and trying to control the territory. That could be very, very serious.
How realistic do you think that is? I mean, there's been a lot of concern, Sir Malcolm, before today of how Hamas could simply melt into the civilian population. And we've already seen, in fact, 1,900 prisoners released into Gaza today. A great many of them, of course, having previous links with terrorism and Hamas. Are you hopeful that a democracy may emerge, or are you perhaps fretful that we might see a rowing back?
As part of the plan, Hamas were offered the opportunity, once the hostages had been released, to simply accept an amnesty, which is on offer, that they would not be prosecuted or imprisoned, but they would be required to hand over their weapons and leave the territory. So those who wish to comply with that, they can do that. That is not going to be a problem. Of course, there will be elements in Hamas who believe that now that Israel has withdrawn from half the territory, they can reoccupy it. Now, that would be absolutely fatal. And it is up to the summit that is meeting at the moment to use all the force at its disposal to make sure that does not happen. Because do remember, Hamas have lost permanently the main leverage they had when they were trying to resist being thrown out of Gaza. The leverage were the hostages who were still alive. They've now got no leverage on that. They've got no pressure they can put on Israel or on anybody else. And therefore they are on the defensive. And if President Trump and his colleagues, and I hope they will at the moment, it looks encouraging, but we have to see not just shaking hands and good words, we have to see who is going to occupy the role of policing the Gaza Strip when the Israeli Defense Force is no longer there. And that means countries have to contribute and train the people who will be doing that. And they have to do that very, very quickly, because every day that passes might make it more difficult.
So, Malcolm, I'm joined in the studio by our political editor, Chris Hobe. He has a question for you.
So, Malcolm, good to talk to you. A quick question in two parts. What did you make of it when you heard Bridget Phillipson say that the UK had played this role behind the scenes in supporting the peace process, a key role, she said? And also, just looking forward, what do you think the UK role...
Yeah, I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep either way, because you have Mike Huckabee, who's the American ambassador in Israel, saying that was rubbish. On the other hand, you have Mike Witkoff, the closest advisor of Donald Trump, saying quite the opposite, saying Britain did play a very, very important part. But, you know, let's not get too carried away with this. Neither Britain nor France nor Germany nor other individual countries can themselves make the decisive decisions that will force progress. The only person that has that actual political power is Donald Trump. He benefits from the fact that Britain and France and Germany and other countries are there. That gives added weight to what he wants to achieve. And I don't actually think on this particular issue it's worth making a big question of what influence did Britain have. We don't know. Trump knows. His closest advisor says it was significant. I hope that's true.
OK, and the second part of the question was, what's our role going forward? We're coughing up £20 million for aid support, but will we be a convener? Will Tony Blair have a role? Will the UK have a role? We're obviously a P5 member of the United Nations, aren't we? But what can we actually do?
Well, in due course, what we want to see is a Palestinian government in Gaza, who actually run Gaza. And that's been agreed as part of the deal. It's called a technocratic government. In other words, it wouldn't be made up of politicians, some of whom might have a terrorist background or anything of that kind. These would be people who might be engineers or lawyers or academics or scientists, but who are people of great ability and great education. And for at least an interim period, they would provide the administration, trying to get the schools, the hospitals, the other local facilities working again, and obviously assisting with the rebuilding of the terrible devastation to the buildings that are around. So that's all fine, but they can't do that in a vacuum, because if there is not a police force or some form of military, temporary military presence from a number of international contributors, then Hamas, or even if Hamas have gone, criminal gangs will take over. There will be anarchy. There'll be it's like being in any country. If there's no police and there's no army to ensure that there's order, then criminals take empty the empty space. And that is the main threat at the moment.
So just finally, Sir Malcolm, you're suggesting maybe some UK representation on the ground as part of this force keeping the peace in Gaza.
I'm not. Sorry, let me intervene right away. I'm not suggesting it's not the role for Britain or France or Germany to send soldiers or anything of that kind. The most useful and sensible contribution has to be from Muslim states, both Arab and non-Arab. Indonesia has said it might be willing to help here. You want to keep the temperature down. You don't want troops from Western countries to be involved in this matter. There's too many difficult memories about the Iraq War and other previous controversies. I don't think it would be actually sensible or wise or diplomatic to ask. Now, individuals, whether it's Donald Trump or Tony Blair, might be able to make a contribution. In Blair's case, I doubt if it would be very substantial. I'm not sure about the Blair appointment proposal, because most of the people in the Middle East who remember Tony Blair remember him as one of the architects of the Iraq War, which was something hugely controversial in the region. So whether that's a wise decision or not is another matter.
Well, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, even Hamas have drawn a red line with the appointment of Sir Tony Blair. They don't want anything to do with the guy.
Well, I'm not terribly interested in what Hamas's views is concerned. They're not going to be involved either way. That's the whole point. Hamas are no longer going to be part of the government of Gaza. And I hope one of the things that will come out of the summit today is a unanimous statement by all the Arab leaders, by Turkey, by other countries represented, to confirm what is already in the agreement, but to confirm it, make sure that Hamas understand they have no allies at all in their suggestion that they should continue to participate. They must leave Gaza. They are no longer going to be involved in this government. They've been a complete tragedy for the people of Gaza. And it's well clear now that there are many tens of thousands of ordinary Palestinians in Gaza who hate Hamas as much as the rest of the world does.
Is it wishful thinking, though, to assume that Hamas can be expunged, will simply cease to exist, or will they just melt into the civilian population and then returned?
Well, it depends what you mean by what you've just said. Obviously, as individuals...
Well, is it naive to believe that Hamas will simply evaporate away?
Well, let me explain what I'm saying. Some of the people who have been part of Hamas are themselves residents of Gaza.
Keir Starmer on our screens now, look.
Well, some of them will be residents of Gaza who decided to join and help Hamas. They may be willing to give up that association and now just become ordinary civilians working in Gaza, living with their own families. Now, that's nothing wrong with that if that's what they're willing to do. An amnesty has already been promised to those who are prepared to reject the Hamas as an organization. But others will have come into Gaza, either from the West Bank or from elsewhere, and they may still be basically terrorists wanting to continue terrorist operations. These are the people who are dangerous if there is a vacuum in Gaza that has not been filled in the way that I indicated a few moments ago.
But the point is, how do we tell the difference? That's the huge challenge, isn't it?
Not you or I who are going to be telling the difference. That's the whole point of having within Gaza a new temporary government of Palestinians who are working with the international community, plus a police force, plus other means of that kind. And they will do what people like that do all the time. If they have reasons to suspect some individual is still a Hamas militant, he would be arrested and imprisoned, and rightly so. But that is a function that exists in many countries when you have a potential threat from a terrorist organization. That's how we've dealt with ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other organizations of that kind.
Well, the difference being that they were bombed out of existence. ISIS were bombed out of existence. Al-Qaeda was. And this is a very, very different, Malcolm. This is a very different situation. It's a brokering of peace where Hamas hasn't been totally eviscerated yet.
No, sorry, you were wrong in your question. Neither Al-Qaeda nor ISIS, unfortunately, have been bombed out of existence. They are no longer a credible terrorist organization of the kind they were in the past. But ISIS is still active in a number of places, as is Al-Qaeda at this very moment. There are individuals. That's the whole point of the criticism of what Israel was doing when it recommenced the war a few weeks ago. They said their objective was to eliminate every single member of Hamas. Well, you can't do that when you're dealing with people who are part of a wider community and are not immediately visible by a uniform or in some other way as to belonging to a terrorist organization. What they have done is what we have done with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are no longer remotely the threat to international peace that they were a few years ago. Hamas, likewise, is no longer a threat in being able to govern Gaza. But they could still be responsible for incidents, for attempts to reorganize, if a vacuum appears and is not filled in the way that I've described.
So, Malcolm, we just saw Sir Keir Starmer shake hands with Donald Trump there. They had a convivial exchange, but, you know, Donald Trump's been polite to all of them. On the 100th birthday today, what would have been, of course, of Margaret Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, what do you think she'd make of what's going on in all of the situation right now?
Well, the thing to remember, I worked in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. I worked in her government for the whole 11 years that she was Prime Minister. And what I saw was a Prime Minister who had very strong beliefs, strong principles, strong values. But she knew that most of the world's problems ultimately can be only resolved by diplomatic means, not just by military ones. And that's why when she met Mr. Gorbachev, the famous meeting, when she came out of the meeting and said, he is a man with whom we can do business, that is when President Reagan realized that something different was happening.
Chris Hope.
Hello?
Yeah, we look back, Malcolm Rifkin, to those times. Of course, there's a different kind of threat there from the Soviet Union, which Margaret Thatcher faced down. But the battles now seem far more confused, I think. The clear enemy in the old days has gone away, and that makes it harder and more of a challenge for those on the foreign stage.
Well, it may be a different challenge, but it's hardly greater than the challenge of the Cold War when the Soviet Union was a world power threatening the existence of the world. Hamas is a miserable little organization of terrorists, most of whom have been killed and destroyed. And yes, it is a threat, but don't try and suggest that somehow Hamas is a more serious problem than the Soviet Union was during the Cold War.
No, I wasn't saying that. It's more confused now that the enemies who countries face. How would you judge Donald Trump, Sir Malcolm Rifkin? Is it time that we reappraise him as this idea of a peacemaker, which is not what his critics would call him?
Well, I think you have to distinguish what we think of the man as a president and covering the whole realm of his responsibilities. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think his behavior has often been appalling. His language is foul. And I think many of his policy decisions have been foolish. However, I came to the view a long time ago when I looked at what Trump had done in his first presidency, that he doesn't like wars. He doesn't mind using American air power to bomb an enemy like he did in Iran. But what he doesn't want to do is to get America tied up, as happened in Afghanistan or Vietnam or issues of that kind. And I think he genuinely, because it interferes with trade, it interferes with business. He's a businessman, basically. So I think he's quite genuine in saying he would like to be remembered as someone who helped end wars. It's partly his vanity. He's very, very concerned with his own reputation, all this nonsense about Nobel Prize and all that sort of thing. So some of it is selfish and rather foolish. But the world benefits when the President of the United States, who is by far, whoever it is the most powerful man in the world, if such a person, whatever his motives, is trying to end wars, whether it be in Ukraine or the Middle East, that's something we can be pleased about and give him credit for.
And so, Malcolm, before we let you go, may I ask you about Sir Keir Starmer's standing, reputation in this conflict? A lot of people saying that perhaps the recognition of the state of Palestine was a mistake. Do you think Sir Keir Starmer has backed the wrong horse?
Well, I think you've asked two separate questions there. On the question of the recognition of Palestine as a state, I think that was a mistake. I think it was very foolish. Because you can't recognize as a state something that manifestly isn't a state. The West Bank and Gaza deserve to become a Palestinian state, but they haven't got that at the moment. So recognition was purely posturing, and it was more to do with the internal problems of the Labour Party. But put on one side that particular decision that he took. In the wider respects, the position of the British government, the French, German and other European governments is broadly the same. And it's working, I think, sensibly, to try not only to have got to where we are today, but to see a situation where Israel and the Palestinians form a new relationship, which ought, in my judgment, to lead to a two-state solution. That will take years, not weeks or months. But it has to be started, and I think that's what the British government, whichever government it was in this respect, it's no different from its conservative predecessor.
Just to interject there, Sir Malcolm, so Tony Blair is on stage there with with Donald Trump, beg your pardon. Sir Keir Starmer, of course, had his turn. Realistically speaking, Sir Malcolm, how big a role do you think Tony Blair is likely to play in this next phase?
Realistically speaking, I think not very much. I think I don't have any objections to him being there. It's nothing to do with me anyway. And he does, in general terms, Blair is an international figure. He can get access to all world leaders. He can influence events. And if he wants to make a personal contribution to advancing the cause of peace in the Middle East, good luck to him. I wish him well. But I don't think the ultimate issues that have to be resolved will be determined by whether Tony Blair is involved or not. He may make a useful contribution, but as I say, he has a mixed reputation in the Middle East, really because of the Iraq War. He was at one stage the envoy of the Western countries to the Middle East after he'd ceased being Prime Minister. Unfortunately, that did not achieve very much of what he would like to have achieved at that time. But again, I've no animus against him. If he thinks he can make a contribution, and if others think he can, then I see no reason to object to it.
Okay, Sir Malcolm Rifkin, thank you so much for your esteemed company today, your expertise. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show on what would have been, of course, Maggie Thatcher's 100th birthday. Sir Malcolm, thank you once again for joining us. Now, it's almost 5 o'clock. You can see pictures on your screen there, one by one, world leaders, and indeed Sir Tony Blair walking up to shake hands with the man of the moment, Donald Trump, as we enter this next phase of the historic signing of the Gaza peace plan. It's already been called, of course, the Trump peace plan. Now, it is bang on 5 p.m. You're welcome to us here on GB News, the Martin Daubney Show, on this historic moment in world history. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, called it what he believes the most significant day in world peace in 50 years. Donald Trump is speaking there. I wonder if we can hear what he's saying, or should we get into Chris Hope? Chris Hope, let's go to you. What you say is always worth hearing. Chris Hope. So Malcolm there, I thought was his usual rambunctious, feisty self, being rather flattering towards the United Kingdom's moment on the world stage. It's very interesting to see there Tony Blair hoving interview, shaking hands with Donald Trump. That might send a shiver down a few spines.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tony Blair will trigger a reaction. Of course, he did have quite a long time in the Middle East, hosting that quartet, trying to bring peace to the Middle East in Jerusalem, living in the hotel there after he quit power in 2007. But I think Malcolm Rifkin there being quite generous towards Jonathan Powell. We heard from Number 10 Downing Street that Jonathan Powell, who's the National Security Advisor, under fire for his stance on China, or blamed to be on his stance on China. We're now seeing the world leaders gather together for this, what they call the family photograph. You're seeing them gather there. Interesting to see who stands where, by the way. We'll watch closely.
I'm always fascinated by that. So as we can see, there are more than 20 world leaders hoping interview now. Is there any decision taken before about who stands where? Do you have a designated spot, or will people just try and steam in and get next to Donald Trump? How does it work?
Having been there before for previous summits, I was at the example at the one of the European summits in Albania earlier this year, and there are little stickers on the steps indicating where you stand. So, as ever in diplomacy, where you stand matters. And if you're a long way from Donald Trump, you're out in the cold. If you're near him in his orbit, you're doing quite well. I think the word, for those who can't hear or can't see on the radio, it says just simply the word peace 2025, not even the country. I mean, I think that's the scale of what we're seeing today. This is peace. It matters so much to so many people, not least, of course, those affected by the trouble in the Middle East, but far wider than that. There's a huge diaspora in the UK, US, other countries around the world watching these images. We're seeing on GBNews closely as they gather. I can't quite see exactly who is standing where, but yes, they are told where to stand. It's not randomly where they stand, but they do stand for particular reasons. Sometimes it can be for if you because by nature where your name falls in the alphabet, but I think not in this case. We're looking now along the line of people there. Keir Starmer there next to Erdogan, next to Sisi.
So Keir Starmer's on the back row. He's about four or five people along on the back row.
I think that's fair because you have got the role of Egypt and Turkey and Qatar in this have been absolutely crucial. So Keir Starmer just outside that group there. I can't quite see where Emmanuel Macron is.
Macron is actually just in front of Sir Keir Starmer on the front row, but a bit further away. If you read too much into it. So Donald Trump clearly surrounded by the leaders of the Middle East, geographically and politically. They are more significant than European leaders. You can see Mark Carney there just on the back row. Again, 3 or 4 along to the right.
Viktor Orban from Hungary there, just to the right. If you look at the picture there of Donald Trump.
And Keir Starmer is on the back row to Donald Trump's immediate right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along. Often
it can be because he's a prime minister, not a president. He's not a head of state. Emmanuel Macron is a head of state. He may be on the front row. We have heads of state, and behind them we have prime ministers. That can often be the case. It's a nuance often missed. But if you are a president, you do outrank a prime minister on the world stage.
Donald Trump there holding court, of course, next to the Egyptian president. There you go, that photo call is wrapped up.
And we are going to be hearing from Sir Keir Starmer at some point in the next couple of hours. He has spoken to reporters out there. We'll hear his take on how it's been going. But yeah, you're seeing there Donald Trump disappear now, presumably into a very large table where this deal will be hammered out, with the proxies, of course, acting on behalf of Hamas. We know there's Qatar, I think, acting on behalf of Hamas, and also Egypt also speaking for them. And of course, we know that the Israeli are not there either, nor is Iran. So, three of the main players who may be very interested in this whole deal will not be there.
Live pictures on your screen now. There's the darkness over Gaza. Earlier on, of course, Donald Trump had said in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, an historic dawn of a new Middle East. Well, the sun has set now on the first day of peace in the area. And I wonder now if we can reflect, Chris Hope, some more on the hostages and the exchange of hostages. We saw a convoy in our pictures earlier on moving towards the nation, and there's been the first hiccup perhaps in this fragile peace. It was always going to be potentially a fragile peace. Initially, 28 bodies of the deceased were promised by Hamas. Of course, all 20 hostages were released. Sir Malcolm Rifkin a short while ago saying that was the huge leverage that Hamas still had, so long as they had the bodies of the living. But there's been a problem releasing the bodies of the deceased, and I believe now we can join our Homeland Security editor, Mark White, who joins us at the top of the 5 o'clock hour, 5:05. Mark White, we saw there the global leaders shaking hands for the individual selfies and then for the group photograph. And the next stage now, they're about to sit down and sign that historic Gaza peace plan.
Yes, and to discuss in more detail about what they can do as a collective body, both to enhance the peace process and help secure it so that it is not derailed from the inevitable bumps in the road, like we're seeing with the repatriation of the remains of the hostages, for instance. On that front, we're told now by the Israel Defense Forces that 2 bodies have been handed over by Hamas. They are being driven to the IDF and Shin Bet forces who are stationed in part of southern Gaza. Then they will be transferred to Israel proper for formal identification. We're told that following that, 2 more coffins with remains of another 2 hostages will be handed over by Hamas to the Red Cross for onward transfer to the Israeli authorities. Clearly, there is some real concern amongst hostage families that the process for releasing the remains of the hostages who didn't live to see this day seems to be more protracted than they were hoping for. I think it was interesting listening to Donald Trump earlier as he spoke in Sharm el-Sheikh. He acknowledged the difficulty that there will be, even for Hamas, obviously, who held these individuals captive for so long, in trying to repatriate some of the remains, just because of the potential difficult circumstances that they came to meet their death in the tunnel systems deep below Gaza. It might be very difficult indeed to be able to extract those remains in a timely manner. That's something they're going to have to work out, because understandably it's deeply, deeply important for Israel as a country, and the families in particular, to have the remains of their loved ones repatriated so that they can be afforded a proper funeral and laid to rest after so long. But I say that's one issue that, of course, they've got to try to deal with, Martin, as they move forward. The other issue is, trying to meet the various points along the way in this 20-point peace plan. And anyone that's ever observed the Middle East, the various peace processes before, knows just how tremendously difficult it is to bring the sides together to get agreement on key issues. I mean, we're talking much further down the road before we raise the spectre, for instance, of the two-state solution, which many in Israel, it has to be said, are just not in the mood for, even entertaining at this stage. But at some point, if this peace holds in the months, maybe years ahead, then that may be something that many people in Israel are willing to revisit.
And Mark White, one of the early hiccups in this fragile peace already, we've heard from the Hostages and Missing Families Forum. They're calling for the immediate suspension of all agreement implementations until every deceased hostage is returned from Gaza. So these, of course, are the families of those who are deceased, and their remnants are still in Gaza. They're demanding that the Israeli government suspends its side of the agreement, stating Hamas's violation of the agreement must be met with a very serious response from the government and the mediators. An agreement must be honoured by both sides. If Hamas does not fulfil their part, then Israel should not fulfil its part either. So the families of those hostages demanding that Israel stops returning prisoners, because Hamas, they say, have already violated their side of the deal.
Yeah, a significant number of prisoners have already been released. Out of the 2,000, we're not sure how many. But I think that particular stance from the Hostage Families Forum may gain a bit of traction if it looks in the day or two ahead that we may be really struggling in terms of getting Hamas to return the remains of many of the remaining hostages. If that becomes apparent, then yes, we could be very early on in this whole process entering quite a sticky period. But I think there will, and as I say, judging by just what I heard from President Trump, I think there was an acknowledgement on his part that it's not an easy process, and perhaps just a little bit more patience is required to allow Hamas to get on with the process of locating and repatriating those remains. But there will only be, and as I say, we're hearing already from the Hostage Families Forum that they don't really have much patience at all. They want a suspension, but nothing official from the Israeli government as to what their feelings are about how quickly or slowly this whole process is taking.
Thank you, Mark, there for bringing us up to speed. As we can see, the delegates there gathering at that Peace 2025 event, the Gaza peace plan for the historic signing of that accord. Thank you very much, Mark White, for joining us, and we'll join you later back in the show. Now, if you're joining us, it's about 12 minutes past 5. For those of you who are just joining us here on GB News, here's a recap of today's historic events.
The war is over. The war is over, okay? You understand that?
Yeah, Donald Trump arrives in Egypt as he prepares to sign the peace plan for Gaza alongside 20 other world leaders. We'll bring you that live.
Every country's come together. And by the way, Iran did put out a statement, you know, that they support this deal very wholeheartedly. So that was in itself something. But no, I think they want to, that's all I do in my life, I make deals.
And earlier today, the US president addressed the Israeli parliament, declaring it was a historic dawn of the Middle East.
Generations from now, this will be remembered as the moment that everything began to change, and change very much for the better.
And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanks Donald Trump for his unwavering support and said he would nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Donald Trump is the greatest friend that the state of Israel has ever had in the White House.
Amidst the applause, not all Israeli politicians were so pleased by Donald Trump's presence.
Over and over again.
Apparently a brace of communists tried to rain on the parade, but they were quickly and efficiently dealt with. In fact, Donald Trump said when they went without missing a beat, that was very efficient. And also today, they are free at last. Huge emotional scenes there. You can see pictures on your screen. If you can't see them, they are relatives embracing hostages released they thought they would never see again. After 737 days in captivity, all living Israeli hostages are finally released, following 738 days, in fact, including today, in Hamas captivity. But 24 bodies are still yet to be returned. Now, the remaining Israelis were exchanged for over 1,900 Palestinian prisoners who are arriving in Gaza and have been throughout the day, as you can see on your screens. Now, many of them are feared to have criminal records, terror backgrounds, links to Hamas, but that was a price worth paying in the eyes of Benjamin Netanyahu. As Keir Starmer joins world leaders in Egypt, and that's after the US ambassador slammed Labour as delusional for claiming that the UK was a key player in this peace deal. Is Britain now a laughingstock on the international stage? Now I'm joined in the studio by Chris Hope, our political editor. Chris, a huge day to reflect upon for those joining us at 5:15 today. Let's start at the beginning. A truly historic speech by Donald Trump in the Israeli parliament there, talking about a historic dawn of a new Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu called Donald Trump the greatest friend Israel has ever had.
It was very moving to watch it on GBNews. Let's look at the remarks of Amir Ohana, the Speaker of the Knesset, their version of Lindsay Hoyle, the House of Commons Speaker. He said Donald Trump was a colossus who will be enshrined in the pantheon of history. Thousands of years from now, the Jewish people will remember you. In return, Donald Trump said that the skies are calm, the guns are silent, and the sirens are still, and the beginning of the age of faith and hope and of God. You have that language which it felt appropriate, because it did feel like a real moment, an outpouring of emotion in the Knesset. This, of course, is the Israeli parliament, people there representing local constituents who may have lost or have hostages who are missing. Later we saw, of course, 20 hostages handed alive back to Israel. We think that 2 of the 28 bodies have been handed, about 2 more to cover, according to Mark White, our security correspondent, editor, forgive me. There was briefing out from the Israeli army that 15 bodies may not be retrieved, Martin. And as I think Mark White was saying earlier, that could become a issue of difference. Just away when Donald Trump's flown back to Washington, but when he meets with the Ukrainian Prime Minister, or President, I should say, in Washington on Friday, when the conversation has moved on, the issue of where these remaining bodies will become a big issue, I think, for Israel. Ian Katz, as Defence Minister, he's saying this, that Hamas's announcement of the expected return of 4 bodies is a failure to meet its commitments. Any delay or deliberate avoidance will be considered a blatant violation of the agreement and will be met accordingly. So, yes, it's a happy day there. We're looking at the images there of Donald Trump.
Trump is now speaking. Let's get over.
You can see that this is probably the greatest assemblage of countries in terms of wealth and power maybe ever assembled, and it's just an honor to be a part of it. We're going to be signing a document that's going to spell out a lot of rules and regulations and lots of other things, and it's very comprehensive, but we've already signed documents in the Middle East and having to do with Israel and Hamas and just about everything else, and it's really working out incredibly well. The hostages, as you know, were let go one time, on schedule. The very sad situation of bodies, which was always a sad situation, and they're being sought out, and they're working with many different people, finding some were brought in and some were not, and they're working out to find out where those bodies are. It's hard to believe they'd even have to say something like that. It's so sad. It's so sad. But what's not said is that we have finally, after, I guess they say 3,000 years, I've heard from 3,000 years to 500 years, but whatever it is, it's a lot. But this was the one, this was the granddaddy of them all, and frankly, I thought this was probably going to be the toughest, and maybe in many ways it was, but we had a lot of good talent. Steve Witkoff, Jared, and Marco, and Pete, and General Kane, who's so great. John Ratcliffe was incredible. We had an amazing array of talent, and we were helped by, in particular, the countries represented at this table. I will say, to me, you were fantastic, and your country is unbelievable. And, I don't think they give you a fair shake. They talk about you as though you're not a nice person, and you happen to be a nice person. You happen to live in a little tough neighborhood. You're surrounded by everybody. And without you, this wouldn't have happened. And I just want to thank you very much. That's Qatar. And he's an amazing leader. And another man who's been a friend of mine for a long time. I don't know what it is. I like the tough people better than I like the soft, easy ones. I don't know what the hell that is. It's a personality problem, I suspect. But this gentleman from a place called Turkey has one of the most powerful armies actually in the world. It's much more powerful than he even lets known. If you look at some of the recent conflicts, he was at the top of them, and he was winning them, and he did win them. And he doesn't want any credits. He doesn't want anything. He just wants to be left alone. He's a tough cookie, but he's been my friend. And every time I've ever needed him, he's been there for me. So I just want to thank President Erdogan, Turkey. With him because he is difficult. They call me. They said, "Would you do me a favor? Could you speak to Erdogan?" And I do, and he never fails us, right, General? He never fails. He's amazing. So I just want to thank you for the friendship. It's great. Thank you very much. And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason we chose Egypt, because you were very helpful. And very, very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this, but we really thought it was appropriate. And you are a great leader. You have very little crime. You have problems that other countries don't have. And, of course, nothing's perfect, but the job you do is amazing, and I want to thank you. Another one, he's been my friend right from the beginning during the campaign against crooked Hillary Clinton. Have you heard of her? We were both downstairs waiting to go up to meet this gentleman who has a place called Egypt, the oldest civilization. They say 6,000 years. China is 5,000 years, but you're actually number one, 6,000 years. Can you believe it? But the oldest, they say, civilization. But so I went up to meet him first, and we liked each other so much that she waited for about an hour and a half. And I think your meeting lasted about 2 minutes with her. So I always remembered that. But that was our first meeting. We had great chemistry together. And he's a fantastic man and a fantastic general, by the way. But he's a great, great president. And I want to thank Egypt and all of your representatives for treating us all so well. Thank you very much. So we're going to be signing, and we're really representative of a whole group of nations, and they're sitting behind us, and you know most of them. I can tell you this guy's got so much money. They all have so much money. There's more money and power sitting behind us. I love that they're behind us. They've never been sitting behind anybody before. This is a unique position for them, but they are seriously, they're among the most powerful countries in the world, the richest countries in the world, and there's never been really an assemblage like what we have today. I don't think, Tamim, I've never seen it anyway. And I want to thank everybody for being with us. Here's a man, I just solved a war for him, Azerbaijan. Did I do a good job? Where's your compatriot here? Here he is. You two guys are still getting along, right? They fought for 32 years. In about 1 hour, we settled it, right? And they like each other now, too. It's good. That's great. I think it's great. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. We have Italy. She's a very strong ruler. She's doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Thank you very much. so many, but we're actually going to be making a speech after this, so this is just a very important signing, but we're doing a signing, then we're doing a speech, and then I may stay behind with the leaders just to talk about that, some things without the press, without the media. But I want to thank the media for you've been so respectful on this deal. You know the importance of the deal, and I really, it was so pleasant to watch. I was on the plane for quite a while listening to the various newscasts, and they were all fair. They were talking about how incredible this is. This is an incredible day for the world, let alone the Middle East. So I just wanted to thank the media. They really treated it with respect. I wish you could be like that on other things, but that's perhaps too much to ask for. But on this, tremendous, everybody feels the same. Just tremendous respect, and we appreciate it very much. Can we get the documents, please? Okay.
Okay. You'll sign right here.
Okay.
Trump there, the first to sign this historic Gaza peace deal. The world leaders will take it in turns to add their names to what is a new dawn in peace in the Middle East. Let's bring in my next guest now, who's been waiting very patiently. That's the former Israeli government spokesperson, Elon Levy. Elon, welcome to the show. It's a truly historic day for peace in the Middle East. Let me have your thoughts on what you're seeing today.
Waiting patiently to go on air while looking at photos of hostages being reunited with their families, wondering if I'm going to be able to contain the tears before going on air. Israelis are euphoric. The celebrations in Hostage Square today were, I think, what VE Day in Trafalgar Square in 1945 must have felt like. Israelis are delighted to see those hostages home with their families after 2 years of hell, 2 years of being held in tunnels, underground, starved, tortured, beaten, held in cages. And they're euphoric that 2 years of war have ended, 2 years of running to a rocket shelter nearly every night and waking up nearly every morning to news of another fallen soldier. Israel has won the war, and the challenge now is how to win the peace. President Trump has proposed a very ambitious 20-point plan. Israel has agreed to it in full. Hamas has not. Hamas is refusing to disarm. It's refusing to demilitarize. It's refusing to give up power. In fact, it's shooting opponents in the streets right now in the Gaza Strip. And what we need now is the full implementation of the Trump plan. Because if that doesn't happen, there will be a next Gaza war. Because Hamas is a bloodthirsty terrorist regime that is sworn to Israel's destruction. And you know what? We don't want a next Gaza war. This one was bad enough, thank you very much. We want it to have been the last Gaza war. The Trump plan has to be enforced in full.
Donald Trump was talking about Iran earlier in the day and saying he's even prepared to work with them. May I ask you, Elon, is that feasible? The Ayatollahs, the Islamist regime in the nation there was marching towards nuclear power. Donald Trump stepped in and claims to have succeeded in eviscerating that using B-2 bombers. With the spectre of Iran in the background, though, is peace possible? Or do you think that perhaps there should be a push on to remove the Ayatollahs altogether?
Iran is the overlooked factor in this war. I think what most people don't understand about the October 7th war is that it wasn't just a war between Hamas in Gaza and Israel. It was a regional war on 7 fronts by the Iranian regime and its proxy armies against Israel. What Hamas did on the morning of October 7th, when it invaded and perpetrated those barbaric atrocities, was to try to drag all of the Iranian regime's other proxy armies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, into a regional war of annihilation against Israel. That was the plan. We've seen tens of thousands of missiles fired at Israel over the last 2 years. And it backfired, and Israel won. But the Iranian regime is still licking its wounds. This is a regime that is still sworn to Israel's destruction, that still leads crowds in chants of death to Israel, death to America. There are variations where they chant death to England as well. So the maximum pressure on the Iranian regime needs to be kept up so that it is able to rebuild its nuclear program, so that it can't rebuild the proxy armies that have brought chaos and misery to so much of the Middle East. If the Iranian regime were to change its stripes and make peace with Israel, there'd be peace in the Middle East overnight. But we're dealing with a fanatical regime, and short of any serious plan to try to topple them, there needs to be maximum pressure put on the regime so it can't rebuild its capabilities. And let's hope the Iranian people have the courage and the opportunity to rise up, overthrow the regime, and join the expanding circle of peace in the Middle East.
May I ask you, Trump's speaking now, let's go back and take a little listen.
I've done other deals and people don't care as much. Big deals, I think they're big deals, but this is something that's taken off like a rocket ship. And it did from the beginning, and I've heard for years, this is the biggest deal, it'll never happen. For years, long before I ran for office, that this is the Middle East. It's the biggest, most complicated deal. And also it's the place that could lead to tremendous problems like World War III. They always talked about World War III would start in the Middle East. And that's not going to happen. We don't want it to start anywhere, actually, but it's not going to happen. So I just want to thank everybody, and I'll see you in a little while. And in particular, thank you all. Thank you, Tamim. Mr. General, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great job. Great job. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Donald Trump there giving his closing speech before they go and have a private meeting, and then there will be a final address to the world's media before the event wraps up. It's gratifying to hear there at least Elon Levy, Donald Trump saying this is the biggest, the most complicated deal in history. They said it couldn't be done. They said World War III could start in the Middle East. That's not going to happen. Isn't that the point now? This is about re-establishing a power base of peace, perhaps amongst unlikely allies in the past, Arab states, Muslim states, Israel, but one common goal: to make sure Hamas can never regrow and to make sure that Iran can't become the head of the serpent once again. Are you hopeful that this will be a lasting peace in the area?
There is an incredible opportunity now to expand the circle of peace in the Middle East. And let's remember, Hamas went to war in order to prevent this. Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the cusp of a peace agreement in October 2023. And Hamas launched this war in order to scupper the prospect of peace in the Middle East. If we see normalization agreements between Israel and Arab neighbors, that would be the ultimate victory against the Iranian regime. But the question of Gaza here is critical, because Israel was left alone for 2 years to fight against the Hamas regime, saying that if it is allowed to continue governing Gaza, then the next war is only a matter of time. And I'm angry. Frankly, I'm angry that it took 2 years for Hamas's state sponsors, for its patrons, Qatar and Turkey, to turn around and tell it, it's game over. You have to end this war and you have to free the hostages. This war could have ended so much sooner if instead of taking Hamas's side, they had condemned it after October 7th and forced it to release the hostages. That didn't happen, but it's better late than never, and we need all the countries in the region now to work on isolating Hamas. It means there can be no reconstruction in the Gaza Strip until Hamas is removed, because until then the reconstruction of Gaza will mean the reconstruction of Hamas. All the concrete that will go in for people's houses will go back into Hamas's tunnels, back into its missiles. So Israel has agreed to a 20-point plan. It includes the dismantling of Hamas's tunnels. It includes de-radicalization. It includes disarmament. That has to happen now. Hamas has not only lost the war, it needs to know that it has lost the war. Because if this ends with Hamas scrambling back on its feet, if this ends with Hamas feeling vindicated by the decision to launch war, vindicated frankly because the British and French governments chose to reward it by recognizing a non-existent Palestinian state, then it will feel that it will launch another war in future because it will get rewarded for that. And Hamas cannot take that lesson from this war. It has to take the lesson that launching war, especially war against Israel, is a darn bad decision, and it shouldn't do that again.
Elon Levy, of course, the initial plan for Benjamin Netanyahu, the stated aim was the total evisceration of Hamas. He would not stop until they're completely wiped out. Yet we find ourselves now, to reach a peace, perhaps need a compromise. Is it your fear, as it has been for many, many peoples over these past troubling months and years that Hamas could simply melt away into the ether and then return and slowly start to get their hand around the throat of any fledgling democracy in the future?
Well, there is a very real risk that Hamas will continue to govern its little rump terrorist state in the Gaza Strip, that there will be pressure to let in construction supplies, knowing that it's going into Hamas's tunnels, that Hamas will begin rebuilding its missiles and rebuilding its war machine. That cannot happen. After Hamas declared war, Israel said its goals are to bring the hostages back and to dismantle Hamas's military and governing infrastructure. And Hamas has now been defeated as a military organization. It is no longer the terrorist army that threatened Israel on October 7th. It's been reduced to a small guerrilla organization. And the challenge now is to put pressure on it to force it to relinquish power. Israel agreed to this deal by President Trump because it's a diplomatic plan to achieve those goals. But Israel is, of course, concerned that if that agreement is not implemented in full, then Hamas is simply going to rebuild its power base, rebuild its war machine, and prepare for the next war, because its goal is the destruction, the annihilation of the state of Israel and everyone in this country. So we need the full implementation of the Trump plan. Hamas has to be removed from power. This has to be a defeat not only for Hamas, but for its ideology of waging jihad in order to destroy Israel.
Thank you so much for your time on this historic day. It's been a true pleasure to have your company. Thank you very much. The former Israeli government spokesperson, Elon Levy, thank you very much indeed. Now, after this short break, we'll be getting more reaction to today's historic Gaza peace deal. You with me, Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Afternoon. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The largely dry theme continues really for the rest of the week, as will the fairly grey skies and the light winds, which is why things aren't moving very far. Big area of high pressure sitting right over us. High pressure generally means the air is sinking, which is why we're not seeing much rain. Having said that, there will again be some drizzly conditions at times through the night, particularly over parts of eastern England, where there's a bit of a breeze across parts of Kent in particular. Elsewhere, though, generally light winds, clear skies across Scotland will allow some mist and fog patches to form here, but generally the cloud keeping the temperatures up in double digits for most towns and cities. But where we've got some clearer skies, parts of Scotland will dip down to 6 or 7 Celsius, even lower in some rural spots. And there will also be some mist and fog patches around. It should clear through the day tomorrow, but might be a little bit of poor visibility around first thing in the morning, particularly through parts of central and eastern Scotland. Northern Ireland starting mostly cloudy, along with most of England and East Wales, but again, West Wales and parts of southwest England should see some breaks in the clouds. So the chance here you could wake up to some sunny spells. And as we go through the day, not a great deal of change. Still that cloud thick enough for some drizzly conditions at times over the Midlands and eastern England especially, but it's going to be fairly light and it'll be pretty patchy as well. But could continue even into the afternoon across eastern England. Otherwise, it's a dry story. Western areas continuing to see some breaks in the cloud and a little bit of sunshine at times. Feels quite pleasant in the sunshine. Feels quite cool where it stays rather dull, but temperatures about average, getting into the low to mid-teens. Not a great deal of change through tomorrow evening. Still the odd drizzly shower across parts of the east, and not a great deal of change in the outlook. Most places staying dry, bar the odd little bit of drizzle. Most places staying cloudy, turning perhaps just a touch cooler.
5 hosts, 5 opinions, 5 fearless debates, 5 unfiltered takes on the day's news.
5 reasons not to be anywhere else on Saturday night.
This is the Saturday 5.
You got me. You got me good there.
Britain's biggest Saturday night TV show.
It's not a bad brand.
Yeah. Uncensored.
Very, very racy tonight on the unpredictable.
What did she say? Can you translate it for us?
And always entertaining.
And how can a country go from being led by William Wallace
Saturday nights from 6 p.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
You're going to want to stay tuned, trust me.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, good bet. 5:38. Let's return now to our top story, of course. It's the world leaders gather at the Gaza Peace Summit in Israel. So people in Egypt, as President Donald Trump says that talks have started for the second phase of the Gaza peace plan. Let's join now my next guest. That's a former British Army officer, Colonel Richard Kemp. Colonel Kemp, always a pleasure to have your company. You and I have spoken since the very, very beginning of the war in Gaza. And one of the huge fears that you had all along was that unless the job was properly done, Gaza could simply melt into the civilian population and perhaps return in future to try and take over again. Are you scared that that could happen now, or do you think that the job could be done and Hamas can be wiped out?
I think there's every likelihood Hamas will try and fight on. They're not going to melt away. They will do their best to retain their weapons, maybe even by rebranding themselves, as we've begun to see. And we've seen them murdering in large numbers some of their opponents in Gaza already. So that's where the next real stage of the Trump plan comes into play, the extent to which there is going to be actual concrete efforts to disarm Hamas and to demilitarize Gaza. And how that happens, how that works, we will just have to wait and see. But one thing I think we can be sure of is, meanwhile, the IDF will be watching very carefully what happens in Gaza, and will have to be ready to react and intervene again should the threat raise its head again. I don't think Israel can afford to make the same mistakes as it made before the 7th of October in 2023.
Colonel Kemp, may I ask you about what appears to be an emerging issue, a thorny topic, and that is the bodies of the deceased hostages. Earlier on today, we were told that they would be released, 28 of them in full. Now we understand only 2 of them are in Red Cross vehicles on their way back to Tel Aviv. And the hostages and missing persons forum, of course, the families of those deceased are saying already this is a catastrophe. And there should be an immediate suspension of all agreements with Hamas. They've betrayed their side of the bargain already. Should Israel cease releasing any prisoners?
I think Israel should certainly verify why this situation has come about. And without a doubt, Israel should cease releasing any further Gazan prisoners until Hamas's side of the deal has been met. And then, of course, if necessary, Israel should be ready to go back to the fight, because this is an integral part of the deal. It may sound less important to the likes of you and me, but certainly for Israelis, the release of all of the remaining 28 hostages who are not alive, it's critically important. I've heard tonight that some family members and some of the supporters for the hostages in Israel are saying Israel should go back into the fight if they're not released. So I think it's really important this happens. And as I say, Israel needs to verify exactly why this is not happening. And one thing that I would always have in the forefront of my mind in this kind of situation is that whatever Hamas says, you can't believe it. This is as we all know, this is a vicious terrorist organization that has no honor. That whatever their word is, you cannot consider it to be true. So I think, we'll just have to wait and see how this unfolds.
Could I ask you how you believe the United Kingdom stands now as we approach this next phase? A lot of people have been critical of Britain's performance, the recognition of the state of Palestine. Keir Starmer wasn't name-checked at that peace in the Middle East, signing a few moments ago. The leaders of Azerbaijan, Turkey, Italy, a lot of them got a mention. Keir Starmer, do you think he's played his hand wrong? Do you think Britain will look back and we can ask questions about perhaps did Britain back the wrong side in this conflict, Colonel Kemp?
I think Britain has behaved disgracefully under this government. First of all, in its decision to put an arms embargo on Israel. Secondly, its threat to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu if he comes to England. And thirdly, by probably the worst of all the actions was to recognise a non-existent Palestinian state in order to appease the anti-Israel elements of its electorate in the UK, without any regard for world peace or for the supporting and a really important ally in Israel. So I think we've behaved very badly over this. If anything, our actions of encouraging Hamas, and don't forget, Hamas were among the strongest people praising Starmer and Macron for recognising a Palestinian state. We've had the opposite effect to the effect Trump's had. Trump has achieved almost the impossible by bringing this peace agreement about. And Britain almost did whatever it could to frustrate that by recognising the Palestinian state. And the problem is, for the future, looking forward, is that Hamas had two major assets. One was the hostages. The living ones now released, the dead ones hopefully released soon. The second asset that Hamas had was Western opinion and Western support, Western appeasement. And this whole program will not go ahead effectively unless the West actually becomes far more robust and far more supportive against Hamas. Because disarming Hamas, demilitarizing Gaza, the West has a role to play in that. But the West must completely change tack to make it as tough as possible for Hamas to continue to exist.
Colonel Kemp, as well as that lasting legacy, perhaps, of betrayal across the Middle East in the eyes of Israel, certainly amongst the United Kingdom's reputational damage, I want to ask you about something you've spoken a lot about as well, and that is the seismic ripples that have come to our own shores. Now, the emboldenment of protesters, the emboldenment of a rising wave of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom as perhaps a fragile peace settles across the Middle East. Do you think we'll find peace on our own streets? Or if those radicals become so emboldened, the next problem is now on British soil?
I'm certain we won't find peace on our own streets. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that, but I think it's true. Clearly, if Hamas is got rid of, one way or the other, as long as there's no further appeasement of Hamas, and if Hamas is disarmed, if it is, and I'm not 100% confident it will be, but if it is, then that will be a big disincentive towards jihadists globally. If they're seen to succeed and are seen to be able to proclaim any kind of victory, that will embolden jihadists everywhere, including in the UK. And that's another reason why it's so important that our government plays its role in standing up against Hamas. If they fail to do that, which I suspect they will, because they, as I mentioned before, domestic politics is more important to them, appeasing their anti-Israel mobs who have flooded onto the streets week after week in the last 2 years. And they're afraid of them. And if they don't stand up to them, then, it's like anything. Appeasement is seen as provocation, and they will just go from strength to strength. I have no doubt whatever about that.
Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you very much for joining us on this historic day. It's always a pleasure to have your huge expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now stay tuned, we'll bring you all the latest live reaction to the historic Gaza peace deal after this short break, as world leaders there amass to sign that deal in Egypt.
Britain was once the envy of the world. But look around. A nation that no longer knows what it is or where it's going. A country that's broken. How do we fix Britain? How do we bring it back? Friday night with Matt Goodwin at 8 p.m. only on GB News.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A day for us today, Penny.
Yeah.
With losing our friend, Mr. John Stapleton, totally unexpectedly. I mean, of course, we knew he was ill.
Yes,
but
we didn't know he was
We
ill.
didn't know he was about to die.
Well, no. When he came in, we came in to the studio, and the three of us kind of were reunited.
Just a month ago.
Just a month ago, exactly. And yesterday, the lovely thing was that I had so many texts from people who you'd recognised as well from GMTV days, other people as well. Everybody saying what a gent he was and how kind and You know, from my point of view, the reason he stayed a friend, you know, obviously, you know, you have these, you call them screen husbands, screen wives, but the reason he stayed a friend was because he was genuinely funny. He made me laugh a lot, all the time. And in fact, I just recently did a little podcast with him. We were talking about things that he hated and everything, and he was talking about he hated people driving around with cars with their windows open and really loud music.
Yeah.
And he was just going, you know, he said, I just shout at them, can you turn it up a bit? There's somebody in Australia who can't quite hear the words. So you never expect it, you never want it. The people you love, you want to live forever. That's it.
That's very well said, yeah. I obviously was very friendly. He was, when we say a gentleman, he was gentle. He was a gentle soul. And then he became very nasty. It was very difficult to like and get on with. It was just you know, when Manchester United started to decline in terms of superiority, and he became so... He became so arrogant.
No, did he really?
Oh, he was unbearable.
He so didn't.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 6. So let's get reaction from my next guest now, live from Tel Aviv, and it's the Israeli intelligence and security expert, Yossi Cooper-Vassar. Welcome to the show, Yossi. It's a pleasure to have your company. May I ask you how fragile you think that the peace may be already? We're hearing that Hamas has already betrayed its side of the deal by not releasing all of the deceased hostages today. And are you confident that Hamas will be removed from power in Gaza?
Well, Hamas obviously appears to be the main obstacle on moving forward towards this vision of peace in the Middle East that President Trump is trying to push forward. And not only that they do not perform the deal exactly as they were promised to, but their refusal to get disarmed or lay down their arms is the main obstacle on the way forward, because everything else depends on that. If they stay in power in Gaza, then we have accomplished nothing. Now it's up to Egypt, Qatar and Turkey to convince them to change their policy. And we shall have to wait and see if this is going to happen or not. The fact that they are part of the deal, those countries, and the fact that they participate now in this conference, in summit in Sharm el-Sheikh is very important, but we have to see them deliver. Otherwise, this entire structure was built on their ability to deliver. If they cannot deliver, we are facing a problem right in the second stage of this program.
We can see live pictures there now from Egypt. The president of Egypt centre stage there, flanked by our own Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Giorgia Meloni, the Premier of Italy. Yossi Cooper-Vassar, could I ask you about where you think the United Kingdom's standing is left after this? Has the United Kingdom betrayed Israel?
I wouldn't say these harsh words of betrayal, but I think the United Kingdom made a terrible mistake by taking a position that hardened the attitude of Hamas and could almost hamper the possibility of moving forward and convincing Hamas to release the hostages. Because, look, this entire issue is the question of how 7th of October is going to go down in Palestinian history. And once you give the Hamas all kinds of rewards for the 7th of October massacre, then you harden their position. And fortunately, Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt and the United States were able to overcome this hurdle. But this was a big mistake by the United Kingdom and also by France and Australia and Canada. This was a big mistake, and they have to realize that they made a mistake, because otherwise there is a tension between Israel and those countries, because there's a feeling in Israel that they made a terrible mistake on our expense and on the expense of chances of peace in the Middle East.
OK, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us. That is live from Tel Aviv, the Israeli intelligence and security expert, Yossi Cooper-Vassar. Thank you very much. Well, as the world leaders still continue to deliver speeches at that historic peace deal in Egypt, a reflection on a day where Donald Trump called this an historic dawn of a new Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu said Donald Trump is the greatest friend Israel has ever had. Well, I'm handing over now to Michelle Dewberry. Jubes & Co. is up next. Michelle Dewberry, what's on your menu?
Thank you very much for that, Martin. Fascinating show, as always. As you rightly reflect on there, a huge moment for the world. I'll bring you Donald Trump's live address to that peace summit tonight. Also, I do want to try and move on to other things, if I may. China, Spygate, pressure now piling onto Keir Starmer about this one. Also, Reform UK, you'll know their policy of £20,000 as a personal allowance. Is that still on the table? Leila Cunningham, Barry Gardner and me in a minute.
Yes, it's time for your latest weather outlook from the Met Office here on GB News. Good evening to you. It's been a largely dry day. Some places started with a bit of drizzle, but the largely dry weather will continue for the next few days, as will the fairly cloudy skies, because this chunky area of high pressure is sitting right over us, and it means the weather's not really shifting too far. There's quite a lot of cloud trapped under that area of high pressure, thick enough for some